think the problem is they have mixed up their religious right to have a building with their right to have it exactly how they want it to be because they believe that God told them this is exactly how it should be. The problem is how do you, and like Jim said earlier, we know as members with our common sense hats on that that isn't the way that temples are really built. It's not the way they're really
And
designed.
these temple squabbles are the first point of contact that Fairview, Texas has with the church. And the bad will we're going to generate if we continue to do this, I think the damage to some degree is already done.
Yeah.
But the bad will we're generating here is going to reverberate for generations.
Like you heard the mayor say, this is the biggest crisis we've ever faced. And there was another resident that got up and said, I've lived here for 20 years. This is the most disturbing crisis that's ever happened. So no one is taking this lightly. There are huge emotions. There are big things at stake on every side for every person. And I just hope and pray for compromise. It can all be solved with a compromise. Everyone can get what they want. Everybody.
Mormonism with the Murph, where Larry Singh explores church history and the church's truth claims. Hello, everyone. So I just want to say before we listen to the panel discussion, some people might maybe push back or be critical. Murph, why do you have on so many former members or critics in this panel discussion and not enough members? Part of the reason was, one, I think it's important to still engage and hear the voices of people who are outside the church, former members or critics. I also did have Jim Bennett on, who is a believing member. But the reason I chose the panel is I felt that Rebecca and Landon and Nemo have been following this very closely and putting out the most content and seem to have the best understanding of this topic. And I think they've done a lot of great work. And I thought they could provide really great commentary and context into this episode. And I wanted to have both Anthony and Jim on because I feel like there are two members who are both inside or former member in terms of, in the case of Anthony, but both can give very thoughtful commentary, particularly on recent church news as well. So that's why, and I think it's just important to share our insights and to hear what they have to say as well. Enjoy the episode. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to my channel, Mormonism with the Murph. And I have a really exciting episode today. I have this illustrious panel, and we're going to be having a panel discussion, and we're going to be discussing the recent controversy about the temple that's being proposed to be built in Fairview, Texas. So I have Nemo, Rebecca, Biblioteca, Landon, Jim, and Anthony. Welcome, guys.
Hi.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, this should be
hello,
really
hello.
Fun. Say again?
I just said hello, hello.
Oh, okay. Yeah, Jim is in his car at the minute. He's traveling. But yeah, we're going to be discussing... Oh, sorry, Jim, go ahead.
I was just George, and so if I ate in and out, please forgive me, and I'll let you guys do all the heavy lifting without me.
No problem. It's great to have you. So yeah, for any people who haven't been following, the church is planning to build a temple in Fairview, Texas, and they're proposing a temple which is 65 feet tall with 109 feet steeple, which I believe is 173, 174 feet. They have now offered to lower it to 158 feet, but the issue is that it exceeds the town zoning ordinances and codes. It exceeds the height restrictions. In Fairview, it's a small rural town, and so this has caused a real issue, and then it's gone to the zoning and planning, and then there was a town council meeting where this was denied without prejudice by the town as well, and it was a very long, over 5-hour meeting where you had the mayor speak, you had the church lawyer speak, and you had a lot of both members of the church from Fairview or other places, and also some residents either in favor or opposed to the temple being built. And we have a great panel who have done a lot of great episodes into this, a lot of work into this. So what we're planning to do is give sort of a commentary, analysis, background, context, and for people to share their views. So I think this will be super fun. But before we dive into that, why don't we just do very brief bios to who you are, and if you have a channel, talk about that as well. Rebecca and Landon, do you want to begin?
Of course. Hi, we are Rebecca Biblioteca and Landon Brophy from Mormonish podcast. And we have been reporting a lot on temples for probably about the last year and a half with the various towns where the LDS church is proposing to build temples. So we're kind of in the know when it comes to temples. We also have together a book club, the Good Book Club, that we run. So that's us. Landon, do you have anything else to add?
No, I just enjoy co-hosting. Being a co-host with Rebecca Biblioteca is a great honor, and just enjoy exploring these things and getting to study the temple and meet the people in these towns as they go through this process.
That's awesome. That's great to finally meet and collaborate on this. You'll have amazing knowledge and insights. Nemo, introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Nemo. I run a YouTube channel, Nemo the Mormon. I generally tend to focus on current affairs of the church and sort of going through the words of church leaders with a fine-tooth comb and seeing what's what about that. And I believe
actively engaged in this topic.
Yeah, I flew out to Texas and spoke to the town council, which I'm sure we'll come to later. But I believe I have already been on an episode of a podcast with everyone on this panel before, which is great. So I'm feeling very at home. Thanks for having me.
Great to have you on. Jim, will we go to you next?
Yes, sorry, I was introducing myself out of turn. I'm the most transient here on the panel. My daughter is starting a doctoral program down at the University of Southern California. And so we are driving, and so I am right outside of St. George, and so I was just warning everybody that internet connection may be spotty, but I am the host of the Inside Out podcast, and I've also spoken to everybody on this panel and have great respect for all of them. I know that Rebecca and Landon have done a lot of heavy lifting on this issue, although Nemo's star turn when he went down and actually spoke to the city council is he did that actually the day after he came on our podcast, and he said to us, hey, you're going to be hearing a few things about me in the next couple of days. And I remember thinking, well, should we ask what we're going to be hearing about? But he just dazzled us with his appearance in Texas, and I thought that his message there was spot on. And so yeah, just as somebody who was an active believing member of the church, I just find it so deeply frustrating that this is the hill we're deciding to die on. So I'm looking very much forward to this conversation, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, me too. No, it'll be great to have you. And also, you're an author of the Faithful Response to the CS Letter, and you've been on multiple podcasts, including Mormon Stories, Mormons Discussions, and my podcast as well, talking about it. So it's great to have you. Last but not least, Anthony, welcome and introduce yourself.
Thank you for having me. So my story is at 49 years old, back in 2016, I experienced a complete collapse of identity, faith, and so forth as I was reading the Gospel Topics essays. And since then, I received a lot of support and help from many different members of the progressive and post-Mormon community that helped me heal, deconstruct, and reconstruct identity. And all of the people here have been part of my journey. Stephen, I've been with you on your podcast at least 3 episodes, I think, so far.
That's right.
And I've been on episodes with Nemo on Mormon Stories. I've had the opportunity to be on Mormonish a few times, and I even did an episode with Jim and Ian on Inside Out. And what people might know me for is I did a TEDx talk about my faith crisis and thriving and building community after a faith crisis, and it published to YouTube a couple of years ago in May of 2022.
That's awesome.
Okay. Can I jump in here real quick? Because I'm known for fact checking things, and I've written down age 49 in 2016. I don't believe this. I'm going to need to see ID, Anthony. I'm not sure I can quite believe that.
If I grew my beard, it would be nice and gray as a 57-year-old. Yes.
And you don't have an active podcast, but you're more famous than us all from your TED Talk, Anthony. So.
Oh, that's very kind. Yeah, I do have a podcast called Life After Deconstruction, but I haven't dropped or published an episode in over about a year. I have some in the queue, but we've had some family health issues take most of my bandwidth. So my podcasting activity over the last 12 to 18 months has mostly been participating in episodes on other people's podcast channels.
Right. No, that's awesome. So the main, I think, meat of the discussion is going to be the city council meeting. We are going to watch the clip of the church lawyer and the mayor, and maybe then just like the final outcome and just give sort of like our commentary, our responses, our views. But I don't know how many of my listeners have been following this closely. I hadn't really been following it until a few days ago. And then I watched the city council meeting, then I started listening to other people's podcasts sort of get brought up to speed. But I think what could be good to begin, and maybe Landon, Rebecca, Nemo, you could sort of lead this, is could you maybe talk a little about like the background and sort of like the facts and like the timeline leading up to the city council meeting of the building of the Fairview Temple?
Yeah, I think we can do that.
Lead.
I've got
between the three of us, which one of us talks faster, right? So we can get through it.
So I've got a short little set of slides here with the dates and everything on. If you want me just to rattle through
why
those.
don't we do that?
Yeah,
for
that'd be
sure.
super helpful.
Absolutely.
Cool.
Let's do that. Let's
so
tell everybody
4th of
what
December
we're talking
2020. 2nd of October 2022. Russell M. Nelson announced a temple for Prosper, Texas. That is important because that will become relevant later. On the 4th of December 2023, so a year and a couple of months later, it was renamed to the McKinney Texas Temple, and it was to be located in the town of Fairview, which isn't actually McKinney. It's a distinct entity unto itself, and they announced a location for it.
Why did it change from the Prosper, Texas to McKinney? Because I'm guessing those are obviously different locations.
I can speak to that. As we understand it, when the church approached the town of Prosper and they were handed Prosper's packet of zoning and, ordinances for building, it was very precise. It was very locked down, if you can say. Now, the church, of course, wants to build something in a residential area that's much larger than the zoning and the codes for a residential area. You can get something called a conditional use permit, and churches will get that, where they will be allowed to go higher, but there are still kind of, there are parameters there too. So seeing how locked down Prosper was and realizing what they needed to build, they took it a few, I think 20 miles away, 30 miles away to Fairview. And what the lawyers have said that we have heard is your zoning codes in Fairview are looser, meaning there's wiggle room. There's room for us to go in and say, you may say this, but we think we can do this. So that's as far as our understanding is. There was more wiggle room there, and perhaps some precedences that they thought they had that would allow them to build something that was, is it 3 or 4 times? Anyway, 173 feet tall in a residential area.
But that's not how it was sold to the members initially, because on the 7th of March, they received a letter from Millicent McNeely that outlined that the church was trying to build a 2-story building that will meet all codes and ordinances, and that didn't turn out to be true. The church requested exemptions in April 2024, so they submitted a document asking for exemptions. There was 2 exemptions. One was so that they didn't have to be as far away from their neighbors, because one of their neighbors on one side was their own meeting house, so that was all fine. The other one was for a variance to the height restrictions in town. They wanted 173 feet and 8 inches. The tallest religious building in town at that time, 68 feet, which is the LDS meeting house that it will be next door to. There was a couple of planning meetings. The church pushed one back. They got to the 11th of April planning meeting and said, actually, no, we'd like a continuance. We'd like to be able to talk to people. It was at this point they got all the members together. In
that meeting on April 11th, that didn't happen. It got postponed or pushed back.
So the meeting happened, and people that turned up to speak about the temple were able to speak about it, but the church didn't present at that point. They wanted a continuance because there'd been already some consternation amongst members in the town about exactly what this temple was. So they wanted the postponement. They wanted members to start sending loads of letters of support to the town planner. And they gathered all the local residents together in the meeting house. And there's recordings where they essentially sat them down. And Richard Abernathy from the church's law firm sat them down and went, the State Department sent out a letter saying that if you don't let us build stuff like this, we can sue you. So watch out for that, which didn't go down well. You can hear people in the background going, that sounds like a threat. And Texans
why
don't
are they
take
doing
well
this to us?
What date was that? Was that, I think I have here, was that May 3rd, the open house where they invited the residents?
We have that on Mormonish podcast. We have that clip, and that was the first interaction with the residents. First, they received the letter saying it's going to be 2 stories and meet zoning codes. The next thing they do is they go to a meeting where one of the very first things that are said is the DOJ will sue you. And you can, like Nemo said, you can hear people go, what? wait, what's happening here in our community? So right away, just some confusion, some not quite understanding what was happening right out of the gate.
That's a nice introduction to the church and our temple.
Yeah.
So yeah, that happened on the 2nd of May 2024 at 6:30 to 8 p.m. At East Stacy Road. And then there was the 9th of May planning and zoning meeting that took place. And it was at that meeting, I believe, that the church was denied the conditional use permit by the planning and zoning. That their recommendation was that it be denied, and that then had to go to the town council. That led to the June meeting, which I was at, and then 2 months continuance because the church realized there was a lot of problems, and they wanted to try and make a solution, and then they came back to the next meeting. So we might go over some of the stuff around June and whatnot, but that's what led us up to certainly the town planners saying, no, we're not happy about this, or the planning and zoning saying we're not happy about this.
So the temple they're proposing, it was 65 feet tall with 109 feet steeple. So,
well, so the entire height was 173 feet 8 inches, but the roof line's 65 feet, and then on top of that, there's 109 feet more upward,
and 43,000 square feet around. So, and I will say that what makes this different, the church is building temples in other towns where there have been concerns about zoning codes and things like that. But what made this different here in McKinney to a lot of us is the church, through their area reps, would send out letters to the residents, encouraging them, as Nemo said, to please send emails to the town council. Please let them know how you feel, that you want the temple to be built. But something that was new that none of us had ever seen before was, please tell the town council how important the height of the building is to your personal religious worship and your right to religious. The height of the steeple, how important that is. So we sort of said that it's the steeple doctrine. So, but the reason that's so important is because, and we'll get into this, or legal workarounds, that if the town on the surface doesn't have the right to tell you you can't worship as your religion dictates you to worship. So this was very unusual, because I've been in the church, I'm 59, I've been in the church 6 decades. I've never heard that the height of a building is the most important part to the temple. There are 11 other temples that the church has built worldwide that have a dome or a flatter roof. And so this was something unusual. And we did see members get up at the planning and zoning meeting and absolutely say, this is incredibly important to our religion, the height of the steeple. And then in later documents, they mentioned the mass of the walls and is equally important to our religious worship. So this was something very unique to all of us, as the letters from area reps encourage people to make sure that it was understood that they could not practice their right to religious freedom to worship as they would without a 173-foot steeple and walls that were over 60 feet tall. So that was unusual.
Right. I want to touch on that in a moment, if the size of a temple or having a steeple is essential to the religious worship. But so you're saying that the planning and zoning committee meeting, that was before the city council meeting?
They recommend, it first goes to P&Z, and they make a recommendation to the town council saying, yes, we think this is great. We see no problems. Go ahead and vote town council. In this case, planning and zoning said, this doesn't adhere to our city codes. We cannot recommend. Then it went to town council.
And my understanding, the city codes in the residential area of the town, it's 35 feet. Now, there might be exemptions to religious buildings and things.
Like the Stake Center, which is already the largest building there in Fairview as far as a religious purpose for a building. So and that's called a conditional use permit. That's standard. You can go in and apply for that when you have a religious building. And there are many churches there in Fairview. And I think that's called Church Row, isn't it, Nemo? You were there.
And the logic behind that in many ways is that church buildings are often in residential areas because they are for the people that live there. I mean, that becomes slightly difficult with the temple again, because that temple isn't for the people that live there. It's for the couple of hundred members in the town and then everyone in the surrounding area that will come in to use it, which again kind of is different to the intention that by and large most religious buildings are in residential areas, because the local residents can use them, like a mosque, like a synagogue, like a church, etc.
Right, because the commercial area of town would have different zones, and it likely would maybe not be an issue if it was in that part of town.
Yeah, the temple could be built as is right now, break ground tomorrow in the commercial zone of Fairview.
Right. But the church, they'd already bought the land and the plot. Is that right? Before they've been applying for the CUP?
This is standard for the church. They almost always in the United States seem to buy in residential areas, and that's why they seem to have such a problem, is because they do try to force these large structures into residential buildings, and clearly the residents who, you know, have put their life savings into their house or their home where they want to live, and all of a sudden you get these massive buildings drop down in the middle of their neighborhood. You can see where they would be concerned. It's not as big as issue here in Utah, where you got so many LDS people around, and the opposition isn't as high. But when you get outside of the Mormon corridor, it starts to become a larger issue, or at least the political strength is a lot stronger outside to stop it. And I think that's what you're seeing here in Fairview, is they're saying, wait a minute, this doesn't belong in our residential community. Either put it in the commercial, or there are buildings that the church does, temples, that would fit in this zone, that could meet the height restrictions. And so they're saying, put one of those here. That's the other option.
I think it's important to mention that Fairview, it's quite a small country, rural town as well. So those
under 15,000.
Those building zones and zoning and codes are relevant to that specific town to sort of maintain the country feel. I'm not a countryman myself, but my dad and my granddad grew up in the country. And while I live in kind of a big town, and it wouldn't necessarily bother me, a big religious building, I can totally understand someone who's living in the country who wants it to be nice and secluded and enjoy their views and dark night skies, like we'll talk about later. I could understand the issue with a really large building which exceeds the zoning codes as well. So why don't we go to the June council meeting then? And
before you do that, can I share a couple thoughts?
Yeah, go ahead.
So little did you know that I experienced some of this in Billings, Montana. I moved to Billings, Montana in 1996. And in June of 1996, and by August of 1996, the church announced that it would build a temple in Billings, Montana. It acquired land on the kind of the edge of the residential part of town that would need to be annexed into the city. And it was close to a residential area on the end of town. And there was opposition to the temple. And what ended up happening, this happened under Hinckley, is the church reduced the size of the temple and the height of the temple. So it's about a 33,000 square foot building. The height, including the steeple, is 120 feet. The church not only made concessions in terms of the size of the temple and the height of the temple, but the schedule of lighting, and so it doesn't, stay on all night, things like that. And there were certainly people in the community who objected to the temple because they weren't excited about Mormons. But there were also people that were concerned about traffic. They didn't understand the use, that it's a Tuesday through Saturday type of thing with kind of a constant flow instead of like a stake conference where everybody shows up at the same time. And they didn't understand some of those things. So as a community, in a town of that time of maybe about 100,000 people with about 3,000 members at that time, maybe 3,500, we did our best to greet our neighbors and explain what we were trying to do and trying to accomplish. And it ended up working out fine. And it's really a pretty amazing temple. And the church owned property surrounding the temple and has since sold some of the lots for residential development. They, at one point, were going to put a chapel on one of the lots. But there's still, even today, it was dedicated in 1999. So about 25 years, almost 25 years later, not all those lots are developed. Now, I bring that up with two thoughts or observations. One is it seems like this was approached differently when Hinckley was president. And I had a conversation with a mutual friend of at least Jim and I, but I'm not going to share who it was because I don't think she's public about that. But she shared that there are different personality types in presidents of the church. And two of those personality types would be a Joseph Smith personality type, where they perceive that they receive a lot of revelation, that they're directed by God and so forth, but they're not as authoritarian. And another personality type of a president of the church might be a Brigham Young type that is much more authoritarian in his way or the highway kind of thing. And what this mutual friend with Jim suggested to me is that her perception was that President Nelson was a combination of those two, that he perceived that he received revelation from God about very specific things, and he was willing to approach things with a strong level of authority. For example, when you think of the November 2015 policy, I understand that he was primarily behind it, and then proclaimed that it was revelation and so forth kind of thing. And so my sense is, when we go into this and we perceive this, I wanted to contrast that with the Billings, Montana temple experience, because my sense is, this is purely speculation, that President Nelson has very specific perceptions about where and how temples should be built today, as well as the changes to the endowment and other kinds of things. And he also has around him a culture or a perception that it's his way. It needs to be his way. And if he says that this is the way, then everybody's got to follow. And so my perception is that as we look through this, perhaps, again, speculation, the reason why there haven't been as many concessions and the reason why maybe there have been threats to bankrupt a town, like when you think of a town of less than 15,000 people getting inundated with thousands, maybe many thousands of emails that have to be, every single one has to be read and recorded and responded to, like overwhelming this city, where they probably don't even have time to do a lot of the other things that they're required to do of the city that got displaced because of what's happening. That I'm thinking, again, speculation, that this wouldn't have happened under Hinckley. It's not what happened in Billings, Montana. And my sense is that some of the members believe that they need to do this because this is what God wants them to do, in part because of the personality type of President Nelson. So again, total speculation, but I wanted to contrast that and put that, propose that before we watch these things, because I think there's possibly context to what's happening here. Nemo.
Well, and I just want to jump in quickly to sort of build on that, because when we did a podcast with Rebecca and Landon, where we talked about this, and we also talked about this when Nemo came on our podcast, and I received a message from a kid he's not a kid, he's now a grown man with a family, but I won't give his name, but I taught him in Sunday school. I know his family well. I've known him for years. And he wrote me and he said, I just listened to your podcast about the McKinney Fairview Temple and wanted to say thank you for talking about it. I live about 15 minutes from where the temple is supposed to be built, and it has been the most bizarre experience. We have been asked to have special fasts so that the town council will have their hearts softened. We were asked to send emails about why the steeple is key to our religious worship. We were encouraged to attend the town council and given prompts about what to say if we were interviewed by media and how to respond if asked if the church is going to sue to get its way. Just wanted to thank you again for covering it on your podcast. This whole thing is very strange. And I've since talked to his family and other people about this. These are members that, are just going about their lives, just going about their business, that are all of a sudden getting drafted into this, that this is the most important thing in the world and the steeple is so essential to your religious worship. Make sure you show up and say so. And it's never occurred to any of these people that a steeple is an important part of religious worship. This is just absolute madness to some degree, that this has become such an important issue. And I think
Oh no, hopefully we haven't lost him.
Oh,
Like, will he come back?
So
Great comment.
essential.
There he is.
You're back. Sorry, you
Oh,
just broke up there, Jim.
Where did I cut out? I was saying genius things.
oh,
Anyway.
and it was
I'll
bizarre.
take your word for that, Jim.
Well, no, it's just bizarre that I was just saying it's just bizarre that this is the hill we're going to die on. So,
And that was a
anyway.
faithful member who was saying that. We get those kinds of letters all the time too, saying
Yeah.
we're not sure what's happening. We don't want to be at odds with our neighbors. I don't know what's going on. Very confused. Nemo.
Go ahead, Nemo.
I just want to say I'm all for like a President Hinckley love-in. Like I can get down behind that. You know, I'm Team Hinckley all the way. But let's not forget he was the president of the church when Rluipa was instigated by the church. So what I think the difference in approach we're seeing here, sort of more finely, is the church is now going to use the thing that Hinckley helped put in the background through back channels to help the church get its way without going after the public, without ruining their PR image, because Hinckley understood PR. So they said, right, well then let's legislate. Now we have that legislation. The church under Nelson is using that as a big stick to try and beat these towns down with. So I think, you know, it's not that Hinckley didn't want to get his way and was willing to capitulate. He just went about it a different way. That's kind of how I would view it. He went through the less PR intensive way and the more subtle way of, right, well, we have these senators that we can press to introduce legislation, and you'd know more about that than I, Jim. You're better connected to the Mormon political scene.
Well, I don't know if my father was involved in that specific legislation, but I assume he probably was. He was in the Senate at the time.
He presented it. He was one of the ones. It was Orrin
He was one of the
Hatch,
sponsors?
your dad, and Smith from Oregon. And I guess we should explain what Rluipa is. It's basically legislation around the Boston Temple. There all of a sudden was pushback on the steeple. People were stunned in the church that there would be pushback. But again, neighbors, and this is back in the early 2000s. And there was actually a woman who stood up at this Fairview town meeting that we're going to watch who said, I was married in the Boston Temple without a steeple, because there was a period of time during litigation where there was no steeple, but it was dedicated. She said, sure, I was married in the temple, but my experience was diminished without a steeple. So I guess she's held on to this her whole 20 years of marriage, that it might have been better had she had a steeple. So because of this scenario, this
she was
bill,
focused on the wrong things then, can we say?
Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah.
Rluipa, Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act. Now on Mormonish, we just barely, right before this, taped a podcast with Colby Reddish, who is an attorney, and we're going to air that on Tuesday. If anybody, look, I'm advertising my own show on Murph's show, but it's really important because basically, very, very simplistically, it was created by these LDS senators. It was put forward, had a lot of support from Ted Kennedy, and it's basically to stop any town from being able to say, not in my neighborhood, Islamic mosque. It was to protect religions from discrimination. It was supposed to be, as Landon likes to say, a shield for these towns.
Which is a good thing.
Unfortunately, in this situation, the church seems to be able to take this and use it as a sword against these towns to beat them down and say, you are stopping us because a high steeple is integral to our religious worship. You're stopping us from building it. So again, put in place 20 years ago, you're right, Hinckley did put that in place. And he did seem to have a kinder, gentler attitude toward temples. He had that, we're going to build 100 temples. They were smaller. They made concessions with neighborhoods. They seem to take pride in that. But now it's just, we have this Rluipa behind us. We have this power. You must do what we say. Again, it's just for blatant religious discriminations where a town could say, because you're Islamic, you're not building here. That's what Rluipa is for, a shield. It's now being used as a sword, unfortunately.
Well, yeah, because does it mean that they can supersede and override civic laws and zoning ordinances?
Listen to the lawyer's speech.
Work with and try to adhere to it, and we'll probably talk about this more. And with what you were saying, Anthony, as well, I think you showed in that story about the Montana Temple that the church can adjust and accommodate to local towns and councils. And it's interesting because wasn't it the Peacemaker talk where President Nelson said that it's time to stop saying it's our way or no way? But it kind of feels like when it's coming to this temple in Fairview, the church is acting like that. They're so headstrong, like it has to be this large, and then they've dropped it like 15 feet, which is not a whole lot. And what I find quite ironic as well is that I don't know this firsthand, but anecdotally, I've heard that there's been changes made to the endowment ceremony. And we would obviously believe the endowment ordinances is more important, that the design, the size of the building is secondary to it's subordinate to it. But there's been quite a big reduction in the length of that, but yet they don't want to give much of a reduction in the height of the temple. I find that ironic and a bit of a double standard in a way that's happening around the
30% reduction in the endowment, but only 8% reduction in steeple height. Those are your stats there, Murph. Yeah.
And President Nelson himself said in a video clip, which we've all seen, it's not about the size of a building. It's about what happens inside. It's about the ordinances. He's been very clear. And Elder Bednar has said the same thing. There's no such thing as a small temple. It's what happens on the inside of the temple. Right. And I completely agree.
You thought, Jim?
Well, I want to jump in here quickly because the Belmont Temple, the Boston Temple, has been brought up as an example. And my cousin, Grant Bennett, who was an Area Authority 70, was tasked with negotiating with Belmont, Massachusetts, to get that temple built. And initially, they built it without a steeple as a compromise. And then Grant went to work to try to work with the city council over a period of years to be able to get the permission to put the steeple up. And by the time they did, they had done so by establishing relationships, by not sort of laying out the my way or the highway. So, I mean, the fact that he got what he wanted, he also got what he wanted because he was taking a much lighter hand in terms of his willingness to go. Belmont, Massachusetts felt listened to in a way that I don't think Fairview, Texas does. And rightfully so, because they're not being listened to. Fairview, Texas, it's just so bizarre to me that this is all being framed as persecution against the church when it's the church that's bringing out the big guns to beat up on a tiny city council. So, and I just wanted to get that I think the Boston example is a template that we ought to be following, and we're not.
Well, and more recently, Paris as well. You know, Bishop Corset, I've quoted him on this many times, but Bishop Corset said there were codes that we had to follow. You know, there were rules that we had to work by with the French municipalities. But ultimately, it was only good because it led to a temple that everyone recognized and appreciated as their own. Right. So he declared that following the codes and the laws are in the area of Versailles, very chintzy area of Paris, right? And very lovely, very swanky. And they built this temple that's 44,000 square feet, same size that they want in Fairview, but only 42 feet tall because they couldn't build it as tall as they wanted. And they worked with the municipality and they got a temple, and the French people love it.
And I can speak to the mind. Oh, go ahead, Landon.
Well, I was going to say, I think that's the problem here is that we're, you know, we all sit and read these things and these quotes, and we'd all agree. And I think we all are agreeing that, yeah, this makes sense. This is good. But that's not the message that the lawyers are putting out for the church. And that's not the local leadership is putting out letters to the members, which is confusing them because I think they all would pretty much agree with this group. And yet they're being told, no, you have to push this. It must be this size. You have to say the steeple's important. And they're scratching their heads going, what is going on? And this is causing a civil war in my community. How is this good for me in any way? How is this good for the church in any way to have this civil war going on?
And they're being told they're being persecuted. They're being told that the only objection to the temple is because it's an LDS temple. And that is simply not true. Between Nemo and Landon and I, we have talked to so many residents. Everyone welcomes an LDS temple in the community. They agree it can be a blessing there. Please come to our community, work with our community. Please follow our codes and our zoning, and let's have a win-win for everyone. But unfortunately, the members are being told that it's persecution. The other people in the town are being called doing the work of the adversary. There are fasts, as Jim mentioned, to please soften the hard hearts of the people in the town. They're simply people trying to protect their elected officials who are trying to enforce their zoning and codes. And I can speak to the mindset of why they will never compromise. We have a recording from a stake level meeting. Stake leaders were called in Fairview to talk to Curtin McConkie lawyers. It was only stake level people. And somebody there at a stake level sent us a recording of this meeting because, again, a lot of information we get are from active members who are saying, please help us. This is ripping our community apart. There's a win-win for everyone. So on this recording,
what year was this, Rebecca?
Huh?
What date was this approximately?
This would have been before the first city council meeting. I was just town council. I was just minding my own business, and I get a text saying, I'm a stake level leader. I'm at a meeting.
June.
Would you like a recording? I'm like, oh my goodness, I feel like deep throat here. This is terrifying. So anyway, but it's very good for people to understand this, because a stake leader asked the Curtin McConkie lawyers, why must it be so big? My neighbors are asking me, what do I tell them? Because I don't know why it needs to be so big. This is a stake level leader asking this. And the lawyer says, well, here's the thing. We will never concede on this height. We will never back down. The brethren have said we will not back down. The reason is, if we give 10 feet in Cody or 5 feet in this town or an inch here, it's a slippery slope, is what they said. We will be left with 35 feet buildings. That is absolutely not true. There's conditional use permits that any church can use to build a beautiful building higher than everything else in the residential area. But this was his answer. So that's very frightening to the members that are hearing this. Oh no, we can't let this happen. We have to have our temples. So it's that idea of the slippery slope. And this recording is on our podcast site on Mormonish. He said they will not back down. And this also could speak to what Anthony was saying, just that attitude of, I've said it, the Lord has said it to me, President Nelson, we have to do it. So I think that's what you're seeing. It's very interesting. Nemo.
Right, go Nemo.
Yeah, just an important statistic, I think, to just interject here is of all the churches extant temples, so all the ones that are currently built, whether they're open or whether they're being refurbished or whether they're awaiting dedication, 175 of them, that's 89%, have a steeple height shorter than what the church is asking for in Fairview. So almost 90% of church temples are shorter than this. So in 90% of other cases, something shorter than this has been acceptable. So when members are going, why does it need to be this tall? It's a very good question.
Yeah.
And I think the church has almost developed a bit of a straw man in arguing a lot of this by saying, oh, there's people saying we don't need a steeple, but we do need a steeple because X, Y, Z. No one's really arguing that they don't need a steeple. Everyone's just asking, why does the steeple have to be this tall specifically?
Because whenever I was first following this, I thought it was all over a steeple, and the town was saying you can't have a steeple. And I was kind of thinking, well, steeple's not essential anyway. And don't get me wrong, I like a steeple as much as the next Irishman. But one of the temples on my mission, Cardston, Alberta, it didn't have a steeple. No. And whenever we went for a mission endowment ceremony, I wasn't like, sorry, President, I ain't going in, no steeple on there. That is not celestial enough. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But the town isn't saying no to a steeple.
Not at all.
You can have the steeple as long as it meets the zoning requirements and the codes as well.
And there is a range that is acceptable to the church from 54 feet to 288 feet. So those are the heights. That's the extreme end of the scale, and the church can pick any height within that. That is already established as being acceptable.
Where is that?
Where is that? That would be Freiburg at 54 feet in Germany, and then Washington, D.C. is 288 feet.
That's of the ones with steeples, and then of course you've got steeples. Ones that don't even have a steeple
or
at
domes.
all.
Yeah. So the shortest absolute height is 42 feet in Paris.
And the temple that they're proposing that the church could have in Fairview, they're saying 42 feet, and then with the steeple height 68 feet. I'm sure that there's a number of temples that could accommodate or fit in that.
Palo Alto, perfectly. Yorba Linda, gorgeous temple. It would have exactly the number of instruction rooms, baptistries, ceiling rooms. It would have everything that the church says it requires there in Fairview. And that's just one example. There are many like that could fit into that space and absolutely meet the needs that the church has expressed that they have for the membership there.
Right. Any other thoughts? Move to the town council.
Yeah, I have a question that I don't know if any of you know the answer to, but when the Helena, Montana temple was built, it went through very, very quickly because they had prefab portions that they connected together. Yep. And so, I mean, one question that I have is this temple already prefabbed? And so they have a sunk cost, and that
Yeah.
maybe is affecting some
No,
of that.
the smaller temples like Cody or like what you described, those are prefabbed. In fact, in Cody, Wyoming, before they even announced to the residents that a town was coming there, the pieces had already been moved into a member's land to wait there for the approvals. So you can see pictures everywhere of the pieces of the temple sitting there waiting. But for these larger temples, because McKinney is McKinney's a very, very large temple. The design, of course, is created, but it's not prefab in that way. But that is a good question, because you're right. That could be a motivation for the pushback or the non-concession, saying, "Oh no, it's already made." But as far
where
as
is
we
it
know,
the same as?
no.
Because that design is the same as somewhere else that already exists, right? Is it
Exactly.
Idaho?
Yeah,
Their
with a
temple in
few
Idaho?
modifications. Yeah.
Yeah, most of the temples follow pretty standard designs.
Yeah.
There's 3 or 4 or 5, you know, over decades they change,
Yeah.
but they follow a standard design. And they could use one of these standard designs in these locations. You just have to build, you get the same square footage, you just build it shorter and wider as opposed to taller and narrower.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, so now we're at the June town council meeting. That's the one that you flew over
June
to
4th,
Texas
yeah.
for, Nemo. And were you also there in attendance, Rebecca and Landon?
No, we weren't. We had tickets, and we were going out to the second one, and then I had a family emergency and we weren't able to go. So Nemo so far is the only one that's made it there, but we had been invited, just didn't make it.
That's quite the trip. How was Texas?
It was warm, very warm.
I bet.
But yeah, it was good. It was really good to be out there. I think the thing that struck me immediately is they drove me down Stacy Road, and as you drive down East Stacy Road, which is where this temple will be, you can see the spire of the meeting house that's 68 feet tall. And you think, right, okay, if the roof line of the temple is going to be 65 feet, that'll sit just below the tip of the spire there. And all of a sudden you get just how big this is going to be and how imposing it will be in the area within the space. So that was one of the benefits of being there on the ground, was just getting to see how it's going to affect people. You know, I stood in people's yards and they said, right, look at the tip of the spire, which we can currently see. No trees are hiding that, so no trees are going to hide the bulk of the temple either. So they've lost their sunset. You know, the sun sets over that way, and it's gone now. I won't see sunsets anymore. Or you know, you look at how very quickly it gets very rural in those neighborhoods, just around Horseshoe Bend and just off Meandering Way and those little streets around there. So yeah, I turned up and then I went to the meeting, and again it was hot. I sat in the air-conditioned truck until it was time to go in. And already like tensions were high, and I don't know whether it was some of the heat or what, but tensions were high. There was arguments breaking out between members and residents.
Wow.
About 2,500 people, members of the church, turned up in white shirts by the end of it, were crowding around outside. Locals had got there 3 or 4 hours before just to try and save seats so that they could be sat in there. So we all go in. I sit there. The church lawyers come in. One of them notices me and recognizes me from YouTube. Calls me out on it. It's like, "Oh, Nemo, what are you doing here?" I was like, you know, wanted a front row seat to the action.
Didn't let on him that you're going to speak?
No, didn't know. And they didn't know I was going to speak. I think they might have suspected it because for some reason, very close to that time, a message went out telling some people not to come to the meeting anymore and that they didn't need everyone to turn up. And that they weren't going to present their plans.
The
There was a
message
stand down
said,
order.
stand down.
Now,
The message from the area rep, stand down. When do we hear words like that as members of the church? It's confusing.
So my ego tells me that was all on me, but I think in reality what it was is the church had had a meeting before and they'd asked for a continuance, because I think they realized, particularly because, and this is important, they needed a supermajority to pass it. So all they could do at that meeting was deny it, because not every member of the town council was there. And because the Planning and Zoning Committee had already recommended that it be denied, all they could do is act on that recommendation. They didn't have enough people, enough members of the town council there to overturn that recommendation and actually approve it instead. So the church, I think, had got wise to that, realized that, well, if we let it go to a vote in this meeting, we can only lose. And that's fair enough of them to ask that it go to a meeting where there can be, you know, a full.
It always seems a bit pointless, everyone showing up for the whole town council isn't there.
Hence the stand down.
Yeah,
Right,
because I don't think they realized until they got there and thought, well, not every member of the town council's here. So at that point, they kind of changed gears. the residents were angry because they felt it was just going to drag out for another 2 months, and that's another 2 months of animosity. That's another 2 months of, when I was sat at that meeting, Israel Roberts, the town manager, said that he'd received 13,500 emails, and that's just what he'd been able to process.
Wow.
13,500 emails, the majority of which were not from people that lived in Fairview. So they were being inundated with stuff like you mentioned earlier. And yeah, but the mayor said, well, people have traveled a long way. He'd been told I was going to be there. So he said, well, there's some people in this room that have traveled a long way to be here, so we want to make sure everyone gets a chance to speak. And we'll take a vote, but they've asked for a continuance, so we're going to vote on whether they get a continuance or not. Any questions before I tell people what I got up and did?
No, why don't you go ahead? Are you going to summarize
sure.
kind of what
I'll
you
summarize
said?
it. I won't read my whole speech. Don't worry.
Right,
I'm not that
that's
indulgent.
And we talked about this before we hit record, that I watched Nemo's video and I was kind of looking to see, is there anything that I can disagree with or push back on?
Yeah.
And I don't think there was really anything that I disagreed with or I thought was inaccurate what Nemo said.
Well, no, because I got up and just made the point, and this is the thing I was fighting back on the most, was that the height of the steeple is important to our religious worship, because that's just not true. And I don't like members being told that that's what they have to get up and say, because Rluipa is meant to defend people's sincerely held religious beliefs, and it doesn't strike me as being someone's sincerely held religious belief if it's been coached to them by a lawyer in order for the church to get something that it wants, right? The members should be able to just get up and, without any prompting, without any coaching from lawyers, say, yes, steeples are important to us. But they can't, because it's just not true, especially when you have quotes from President Nelson where he says it's not the architecture, it's not the location, it's the ordinances inside. You get Bednar, I believe his exact quote is, who cares what size the temple is as long as you have access to the same covenants and ordinances. It's a very clear attitude. There's quotes about the angel Moroni to the same effect, saying it's not necessary for every temple.
It's not essential.
It's not essential, right?
It's a nice religious symbol.
Yeah.
It's just strange, this rhetoric that they're given.
So I got up and made a few points. I made a point that there's 4 temples that just don't have steeples at all. Cardston, Hawaii, Mesa, and Paris. And Paris is as recent as 2017, so it's not like it's an old school thing that we've done away with. We're still doing it. So I made that point, but I said it's not even about steeples. And I gave some of those stats about, just the amount of steeples that are shorter than the one that they're asking for, and how it's not even tied to square footage, because there's some with shorter steeples but that are bigger in square footage than what's being asked for Fairview. So there's no set proportions that temples need to be. They can be wide, short. So I was just making the point that yes, there is a way for you to have a temple. It just has to come down within the code. In North America, the shortest one's 60 foot. In Snowflake, Arizona, it's only a 60-foot temple. So there are ways of doing this, was my point. And I was just very upset generally that the church was lying about sincerely held religious beliefs, because that makes it difficult for things like Rluipa to exist, which should genuinely defend people's sincerely held religious beliefs. But then when it's weaponized in this way, or when leaders of a church can say, oh, well, we've always believed this, even though we haven't, it's kind of like we've always been at war with East Asia, right? It's that Orwell thing. Oh, that's always been the way it is. And I felt the need to get in and say, no, that isn't the way it is. And actually, I quoted President Nelson, that quote you said before, about now is time to stop insisting that it's our way or no way. I made that quote. I said, where's that attitude on? Why aren't we listening to him?
Exactly.
Yeah. So that's what I did. And the lawyers were scribbling furiously behind me. They weren't happy with me. And they, in the next meeting, which I'm sure we'll come to, they even referenced me. So
that's right.
Clearly, it had them a bit rattled.
So after that, there was like a continuance. So the church request, was it like 2 months to basically readjust and come up with a new proposal? Because the original one was the 173 feet and how many inches temple. They were going to readjust, and had the town made it clear to them that 68 feet is what we would accept.
Yeah. And they made it clear,
please bring us something. Please bring us something back. And Landon has a very good list of what the temple or what the church did in that 2-month period in between time when they were hopefully working on a new proposal. Landon, do you want to do that list?
Well, the first thing they did within days was hire a new law firm that specialized in Rluipa. So it was pretty obvious right from the start they weren't going to make any changes to the temple height. Then they had a fast that the hearts of the people would be changed. And so all the steps that we saw that they were taking, none of them indicated in any way that they were going to make any changes. And then they had a meeting with the town council that they asked for, in which they brought their lawyers to that as well. And then just 2 days before, they sent out an 81-page brief on why the temple was important, including Rluipa and its statues and what could happen to them if they didn't pass it. So
Right.
at no time, they did come back with that. We'll lower the temple 15 feet, which if you look at the picture, you'll see that the 15 feet is just a spindle, basically, the last 15 feet on top of the temple. So really, it made no change to the community around them and what they would see or not see. And they said one of the things that came up was the residents in the first meeting said, "Why are you calling this the McKinney Temple when it's built in Fairview? Why don't you call it the Fairview Temple?" So they
Caused so much
said they would.
confusion for me for a while. I'm
Yes.
like, everyone's going on about the McKinney Temple. What's this thing in Fairview? And it's the same
Fairview,
thing.
They
yes.
said it was the zip code, but what the church didn't recognize is there is some not great blood
Animosity.
between the two towns. There's been some dealings with an airport and other kinds of land. So it's just a slap in the face to put a large building in Fairview and call it the name of the town next to them. So of course the church, I think, was just going off zip codes. They do that routinely. It's not named for what it is, but so they did offer to rename it, but we don't know what to. We never heard
Yeah,
that.
they didn't say what they would rename it. And then the day before, they sent another legal brief out to them. So at no point were architects or developers or those type of people involved. It was always lawyers, which I think is what gave the town saying, why would we even meet with you when you're not bringing anything to the table at this point
And
of what we've asked?
the lawyers were always saying, "Oh, well, we'll have to go back to Salt Lake. We can't make any
Yes.
decisions." So,
Yeah.
so the church was getting upset and getting quite frustrated and saying, "You won't even meet with us. You won't meet with us. You won't allow us to meet with extra people." But why would these town leaders meet with these lawyers at all? Because they can't make any decisions. They can't have a meaningful negotiation with them. They can't have they can't make meaningful compromise with them, because the backstop for these lawyers is always, well, we have to go check what the prophet wants. We have to go check what the prophet wants. So that must be incredibly frustrating for those town leaders, I would imagine.
Yeah, and we heard that over and over. Why are there no decision makers here? Typically, when you are talking about this kind of negotiation, you send someone who is able to make a decision. And the people in the town council and other people involved are like, why do they never send any decision makers? And you will hear in what we're going to listen to lawyers say they won't meet with this. This is not true. Like most towns, they have things called sunshine laws, very, very specific, strict rules about how many can meet, who can meet, where they can meet openly, if it's something that has to have an agenda put out. And as we've learned from the town council and others, their attorneys are the ones that are telling them, no, you can't meet with them right now because of these sunshine laws. Also, they wanted to meet with, I think it was the church leaders, and the attorney was advising, you need to talk to the lawyers, or maybe it was the other way around. I can't remember, but there were strict parameters is what I'm trying to say. The town council would love to meet with everybody because they want to work this out, but there are so many parameters that a normal person wouldn't understand about, sunshine laws, transparency, that kind of thing.
And you also have to remember, this town council is all volunteer. So
everyone's a volunteer. So when you talk about
regular
gridlock,
jobs,
when
regular
you talk
jobs,
about gridlock,
and then trying to work through this.
Yeah, these are volunteers who are cataloging 15,000 emails. When the area rep pushes a button and sends an email to church members that say, by 5 o'clock Monday night, we need to get 15,000 emails to this man, Israel Roberts. It happened. And what did Israel Roberts do? Well, first, he probably had a coronary. He has to log every single one. It's gridlock for a small town.
Right. And I'm just picking back on what you're saying earlier about having a decision maker there. Like, certainly we know that the First Presidency oversee the location and the building and construction of temples. So if people were trying to argue that this is like local authorities or local members or local leaders or the church lawyer who are campaigning for this, like, certainly the church is either directing this or they're certainly aware and approving of this. They're not trying to stop this. Nemo, you had a comment?
Yeah, and then I want to let Anthony jump in because I think he had something he wanted to say. I tried to make this known in my comments, and I was trying to kind of push a button. I said I want the church leaders to publicly censure John Cannon, who's been espousing this idea that steeple height is part of our temple worship, because he's the one that sent that letter out. He's the Area 70 that did it. Now, I know that that's not come from him, but I wanted the church to have to come down and say, no, that's come from us. Or, yeah, okay, we do have an opportunity. We can throw him under the bus. And then, yeah, that's not nice, but that will allow them to save some face and step back and go, right, yeah, he went a bit rogue. We're not going to fight this battle. We won't die on this hill. Trying to either give them a way out or just get some clarity is what I was kind of going for there. And maybe that wasn't nice to John Cannon, so I apologize if he was upset by that.
Right.
Anthony, please.
Anthony, yes. Do you have a comment?
No, I don't have a comment.
I saw a hand go up earlier.
I think it was Jim. Was it Jim?
Jim had a comment.
We're all waving our hands. Pick me,
Yeah.
pick
We're
me.
so glad you're back, Jim.
I'm just coming out of the Virgin River Gorge, so I'm excited to be rejoining you, and I'm assuming you've solved all of the problems in my absence.
It's over. We're done.
We're barely even there. So I do appreciate that time is of the essence, and we're going to watch the first clip. But right before you watch it, can you give us a sense for what is sort of like the reactions and the feelings of the residents of Fairview Town? What are they saying? What are they feeling with the church really just wanting to come in, build a large temple, which is beyond the zoning codes, and pretty much say, if yous aren't going to accept it under our Rluipa, or sounds like Dua Lipa to me, we'll take legal action and we can sue you. What's sort of like the reaction of the town residents?
Bring it on. Honestly, some of it has become just fighting spirit. They're like, okay, bring it on. They want to fight. We'll give them a fight, because this is Texas, and they won't be kind of spoken down to like that. They won't be pushed around like that.
Shotguns are right.
But I think before they got
to get to that point.
Yeah. That's where they're at now.
Because when we first got involved with talking to towns where temples were being built, it was sort of like, oh, can you help us understand what Mormons are? Because we don't know who these are. We're religious, and I'm mostly speaking about Cody right now. We're religious people. The LDS are religious. I'm sure as two churches, we can come together as religious people and figure this out. And then these things start happening. Similar scenario in Cody. Lawsuits threatened. You can look up these headlines. And at that point, these residents are going, what is this? I don't think this is a church. They're very confused. And they always like to say, we didn't know anything about Mormons before the temple started. And then they get this look in their eye and they say, we do now. And I know that's not what the church wants to have happen. I know that's not what the members want to have happen. The members on the ground are wonderful, civic-minded people of their community, but it's almost like they've been activated like some kind of sleeper cell to have to do these things. I think is out of character. And so in Fairview, the residents that we dealt with, same thing. Oh, these are our good neighbors. These are our good friends. We'll work this out. We'll talk about this. It'll be fine. This is a church. What's the first thing that happened? A meeting where a lawyer right away said, we're going to sue you. And in this case, it's Texas. Don't mess with Texas. You could hear audibly in the background, what? And it kind of took off from there. But the initial reaction is always, oh, let's find out what's going on here. But when they sense that they're being misled, like a letter that says it's only 2 stories until they see the schematic, that's not how you go into a town. And it puts the members in a terrible position, I feel, because they're civic minded. It's their community and it's being ripped apart.
And Jim and Anthony, I'd like to get you to weigh in, like, doesn't this just look kind of bad for the church? Like, don't they care about PR, their public image? Like, even, like, not even getting into the legal technicalities, but just coming into a small rural town who are just minding their own business. They're like, okay, the LDS church want to come build a temple, and we're like, it's going to be this size. We don't really care too much about your zoning regulations and your ordinances, and if you don't like it, we're going to sue. It's kind of like, who do you think you are coming into our town and demanding the size of a temple?
No, I agree with you 100%. I mean, the church's primary mission is to share the gospel, to preach the gospel to all nations, kindreds, tongues, and people. How do you do that when the first thing, when your introduction to them is to threaten a lawsuit, is to sue them, is to create the amount of bad will we are generating in Fairview, Texas is massive. And the idea that we're going to turn around and have young missionaries come knock on their doors and say, hey, we're from the church that has the massive 173-foot steeple right next door to you. How would you like to hear our message? It's terrible PR. It's really interesting because we just had dinner with the Sherinian family. They have now moved to Salt Lake City. Aaron Sherinian, the new PR director, and I started talking to him about not specifically this issue, but he's the one who kept getting beaten up by all of the Desnats and all of these guys, and we were discussing the fact that these sort of online bullies are very often the first point of contact that people have when they go online to learn about the church. And these temple squabbles are the first point of contact that Fairview, Texas has with the church. And the bad will we're going to generate if we continue to do this, I think the damage to some degree is already done.
Yeah.
But the bad will we're generating here is going to reverberate for generations. Is a steeple intrinsic part of our worship than a steeple is? I think so. I just think I just keep coming back to, this is an unforced error. This is not something, if they were coming in and demanding that we don't do temple ordinances or that we change the temple ordinances in some fundamental way, I can understand why that will be something we're fighting for. But a steeple, a building size, it is not worth. It is not worth the damage we are doing to the church's reputation to do this.
And I want to point out, this isn't just Fairview. We're seeing this in Las Vegas. We're seeing this in Cody, Wyoming. We saw it in Heber, Utah. We're seeing it in Bakersfield, California. We saw it in Nauvoo with the visitor center there. These squabbles are going all over the country. You're seeing these squabbles, and the main culprit seems to be that the church is coming in with Rluipa and saying, you're taking what we're giving you, and if you fight back, we'll sue you. And that just is not working.
But we're persecuted. The church is so persecuted.
And residents are really afraid. They're very afraid to speak back. In Lone Mountain, where they're trying to build a temple, this is Vegas area, a resident who said, please follow our zoning and our codes. Somebody left her a negative review about her business. This person is a religious bigot. Do not go to her business anymore. Okay, that's terrifying. We saw things like that happen in Heber too, where residents who were trying to protect dark skies, there was a lawsuit trying to protect the dark sky. They set up booths outside of businesses. They got permission. Can we gather some signatures, And next day, the business owner comes out and says, we've kind of been told that maybe people won't come to our business so much if we let you be here. So this has real world impact on people's businesses, lives, reputations. And it's very scary to be told you're a religious bigot or you're persecuting something or someone simply because you're saying, I want my town to enact their zoning and their codes. I want our elected officials who we elected to represent everyone in the town. But instead, it's very easy to cry religious bigot. And that is not what's happening here at all.
Very good.
So yeah. And
go ahead.
And my sense is that's why I brought up earlier, what my friend suggested, of different personality types of prophets. And my sense is that President Nelson and those around him really believe that this is what God wants to have happen. So they sincerely believe this. And President Nelson's approach to things seems to have some elements of a Brigham Young authoritarian way of doing things and communicating this is the way that it needs to be, this is the way it needs to happen, and this is God's will. And people sincerely believe that. And so, I would like to think that there will be future presidents of the church that have a little bit different personality, and they would potentially approach some of these things differently. But I absolutely agree that this is creating bad will and hurting the reputation of the church. But my sense is because they believe that the president Nelson and those around him believe this is really what God wants to have happen. They don't care because God will make it right. God will justify them. That's my sense.
And we'll touch on this in a moment, but in the statement from the lawyer, I think it's as well that they think the zoning ordinances aren't as tight in Fairview, so they're maybe pushing for what they think that they can get as much as they can get. And I think as well, like, and we'll talk about this as we listen to them, but Fairview come across the town council and even a lot of the residents quite reasonable, quite fair, willing to try to find a compromise. I think even if the church was like, they go in with 174 feet, that's what we want for the temple. Okay, that's too high. Okay, why don't we drop? Could you even like give us 100 or 90? And there could maybe be a bit more negotiation or compromise. But it just seems that they're being very adamant and unreasonable. This is the size of the temple we want, and if we don't get it, then we're going to sue.
From conversations I had with locals on the ground, this will be my final comment, it was very much the case that if they'd come in with something like Yorba Linda, which I think would have been 3 feet too tall, something like that, maybe 12 feet too tall even, they probably would have got it. They probably would have they would have got it. This was not it only became not 1 inch more. It only became not 1 inch higher because the church came in so heavily with, well, we have a right to do this, so we're going to make it happen. And then people and I've said this before, what the church are coming in when they're looking for a conditional use permit like this, they are coming into a town and they should be saying, please let us have an exemption to your laws and your ordinances so that we can have the building that we would like, please, and thank you. And that requires you to have the goodwill of the town to go, yes, we will make an exception, because ultimately it's within the town's power to say, no, that is too unreasonable what you're asking. We will not allow that exception. They're asking for an exception, and you don't ask for an exception by demanding something and then threatening to sue if you don't get the exception. That doesn't seem to me to be how you should approach people who are in the position to tell you no. At least.
And do you ever watch The Apprentice, Nemo, when they're out and they're trying to like negotiate and say like, I don't know, there's a rug that costs 100 quid and they're like, oh, I'll buy it off you for 20. It's like, that's just kind of insulting. And I think that's probably how they feel like it's way too high. And like they say, it comes across quite arrogant. But anyway.
Well, if I could mention this, when they did say, all right, we'll lower it 15 feet and we'll rename it. In a letter to members, they said, members, we have made significant concessions to the town and they just won't accept them. Significant concessions. And again, like Nemo said, they're the applicant. An applicant doesn't make concessions, but the members, a lot of the talking points that you'll hear in the lawyer speaking and a lot of these things, they're talking points kind of to members, you know, we've made concessions, we've tried, and we're being persecuted, you know? And so I think a lot of the members don't really realize that it literally is just follow our freaking zoning and you can have your temple. I mean, it's that easy. But unfortunately, the members hear these other words, and of course, then they feel nervous and afraid, and what's our town doing to us? And are we being persecuted? And in a letter that they sent out in one of the states from the area rep, they said, let's fast for our children going back to school because they will be persecuted. There's going to be contention. So to me, that's fear mongering that the kids, and who knows, maybe the kids will start talking about it. Well, why does your dad want to do this and your dad want to do that? But to stir this pot, this persecution pot, it serves no good end at all. I'm not saying these feelings and emotions aren't real, but I feel they've been manipulated and they've been stirred from higher up. How high that is, I don't know. But to tell people, watch for the persecution, you know, be careful, they're doing the work of the adversary. Of course, the members are going to be confused and afraid.
No, that's absolutely right. And just to jump in quickly, we don't seem to be able to allow for the possibility that there could be any other motive for opposing this temple than some kind of deep, dark, satanic hatred for the church. We do not allow for the possibility of good faith, reasonable objections to the temple. And I think that is skewing this discussion almost more than anything else, is that if we could go in and treat these, I do not think the church is treating the people of Fairview in good faith. We're not accepting them in good faith. We are assuming deep, dark, sinister motives that just aren't there.
But to Anthony's point, I think this is a really important point to make, Jim. to Anthony's point, if you believe that God has told you to do it this way and it must be this way and that's come from God, then any objection to that, any barrier to that is from Satan. And then you start ascribing that to those people. So from that church perspective, there is no reasonable objection, because has Satan ever offered a reasonable objection to the work of the Lord? No. That honestly, I think
that's an excellent point. It's I don't know.
Well, I can speak to that with the conversation I had with a family member, where I was explaining all the different temples that our podcast is watching and what's happening. And I very carefully and reasonably, this is a faithful family member, explained this is what's happening. This is, the church's perspective, and this is what they're doing. These are how the residents that we work with feel. I said, do you think that any of this sounds ethical? Do you see that there might be some problems? And the family member said, yes, it isn't really ethical. I can see these problems, but, and then he said exactly what you guys are saying. The Lord wants his temple, and it's at all costs. We must do it. And then the concept is, once it's built, once we've beaten you into the ground to build it, you will eventually see what a blessing it is. Eventually, it will all be made right. And this is a faithful member, and this is their point of view, and I understand why they have it. So anything goes in this temple building. On the other side, we receive emails, texts, phone calls from faithful members in all of these areas that say to us, I can't say this out loud. I can't tell anyone. I want to send you this letter so you can look at it. Maybe you can put this out. Maybe you can do a podcast on it and help people understand. I'm a faithful member. A lot of us don't like what's happening. We don't like what we're being asked to do. Can you help? And that is our entire motivation, is that all the information we get are from good, faithful members who just are civic minded and community minded and know that there's a workaround and that it's not just persecution. I've even heard the idea, the concept that perhaps the church may be on board with this kind of behavior so that the members can feel persecuted. It definitely brings you closer to your religion and your ideology. You bond together over persecution. Our kids at school are being persecuted. We have to fight. It could be sort of a fabricated scenario. I don't know what anyone
I feel
else
like if Joseph Smith was here, he'd be like, is this really? Is this persecution? This really?
Exactly. Yeah, there is that. But
well,
again,
there is the tribal identity that comes with persecution is very, very strong. Yes. And you can see that manifesting itself when you watch some of these comments at the town council meeting. The one woman particularly who went in and said that essentially this temple had been designed by God.
Yes.
That the actual design of the temple, I mean, anybody that spends any time anywhere near church administration knows the bureaucracy that all of this goes through. The idea that the blueprints for the temple fell out of heaven, fully formed, is absolute nonsense. But the way that this woman was describing it, she says this design came from God. Mm-hmm. So to Nemo's point, when has Satan ever offered any kind of constructive criticism against the church? If this is actually the way the church works and God designs these temples, you can really gin up a hardcore persecution complex there. You can get a lot of tribal juices flowing. And all it does is exacerbate the us versus them narrative that will make it impossible to turn around and try to actually build bridges with these people and teach the gospel to these people.
Right.
One faithful member actually got up and said in the town council meeting to the town council, you are making us choose because God has designed this temple. You are making us choose between God and being good neighbors. Mm-hmm. To which we all go, that makes no sense. The gospel is to be a good neighbor, and the way you show your respect to God is by being a good neighbor. But they looked at it as, because you're denying us this temple, we have to follow the prophet, and we can't be good neighbors at this point because of what's happening. And that was just a sad statement to me.
Yeah. And even if the Lord does want a temple in Fairview, I don't think he necessarily is super particular about what size or scale or design it has to be. That his will and revelation could be adapted to circumstances. That sounds like a paraphrase of the happiness ladder, but we won't.
It's about the ordinances. The prophet himself has already said it's only
Yeah.
about the ordinances. You can do that anywhere.
Okay, well, let's get into, because this could go on forever. We don't want to go as long as the town council meeting, for flip's sake. So it was about 5.25 hours, the town council meeting, and you had the mayor speak, the church lawyer speak, and then a lot, like probably like 4 hours of it was just either members of the church coming up and speaking or residents of the town. And I actually
Over
thought
70 people, 70 people were allowed to speak. And if anybody does want to watch it in its entirety with commentary, we do have it on our podcast channel. It's crazy.
I think they should. I think for the most part, like while this is divided and this is contentious, shall we say, I actually thought for the most part, like obviously there's some people that are quite passionate, emotional, but I thought it was very civil and people articulated their points of view and their positions. And I didn't find that there's a lot of animosity as well. And I thought it was very even-handed between, representing between members and Fairview residents as well.
While you're loading that up, I don't know what it was like this time. I think the mayor asked people not to clap and applaud and whatever, because when I was there in person, you could feel the tension in the room. Like it was a tense environment. So hopefully it did calm down by this next meeting. But I just want to report that when I was there in person, it was very charged, definitely.
Right. And at the second meeting, most of the members that spoke were in leadership. They had at this point said, we just want leadership to speak. So you had a lot of bishops, you had people in temple presidencies. That's why it's so interesting to watch, because the meeting before, which is also available, it was your typical member resident, but in this one, it was mostly leadership speaking.
And who doesn't love a wee bit of contention sometimes? Jim, when you had your discussion with Jacob Hansen on Mormon book reviews, I remember being like, oh, love this. I'm going to get me some popcorn and watch this. This is going to be fun. We all want a wee bit of contention in our lives. Right. I'm going to hit play. Let me know if you can hear it. This is the church lawyer. What is his name?
Richard
Abernathy.
Okay.
I like to call him
and he used to be the Fairview attorney about 2 decades ago. He worked for the city.
Hopefully the sound is okay. And if you want me to pause at any point throughout to give a comment or to explain something, let me know. So
don't give us that option. We'll be here all evening.
Yeah, I know. And your viewers might want to just jack the volume. It's hard to hear.
Okay, I'm going to hit play. Let me know if you can hear it okay.
Richard Abernathy, and I represent the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and thank you for your time this evening. I've been a lawyer for almost 47 years. In 46 of those years, I've represented cities with pride and gratitude. I even had the privilege of representing the town of Fairview. It's a beautiful town. A lot of good things happen in Fairview. What the council apparently plans to do in this zoning case is inconsistent with what I understand the town's about. I say apparently because at the July 11th, 2024 meeting with representatives of the church in town, the mayor and Dr. Hubbard told the church's representatives that neither of them would support the church's application or the church's most recent offer. They said they would only support a 68-foot steeple and a 42-foot building height. I take you at your word. That is your position tonight. Since it takes 6 of you to approve our proposal, that means the church's application or its most recent offer will fail without, in my view, fully considering all the relevant law, facts, and issues. I don't understand. I just don't understand. Let's start with the meeting tonight. Fairview's new procedures for the operation of this meeting effectively denies this church, its members, its representatives, and supporters from both attending and speaking at the meeting, which very likely is a violation of the Open Meetings Act. This differential treatment should not be allowed by you. For example, your sign outside states that there cannot be live streaming inside the building. In my opinion, the Open Meetings Act says that anybody can videotape this meeting anytime they want to. What is the basis of your denial to allow anybody in here to videotape whatever they want to videotape or live stream it?
Pause.
I cannot find where you publish.
I just want to make a little point about that. So that's not exactly how it is. But again, it sounds terrible. They're not being allowed to live stream. They just didn't want people holding their phones up in the meeting. The meeting was live streamed to 3,000 different locations. The town paid extra for a license to be able to do that. Well, they also paid $10,000 for a larger venue so that all the residents and LDS members could come in. So I think what they were saying is they just to keep decorum in the meeting, don't want people waving their phones around, taping it. It is available everywhere and was live streamed free of charge. Anyone could log on and watch it. So, but again, it sounds terrible, right? They're not letting us see what's happening here, and that's not the case.
Right. And also, I forgot to note that I took this clip from, I believe it was the Mormon newscast. So that's what all the comments are popping up. And I think as well, Nemo and
some of the comments are about even the speaker from before. So some of them make no sense. So for your viewers and listeners, I would say just disregard those completely and focus on the lawyer.
The rules for the process of making public comments. In my opinion, that is a requirement of the Open Meetings Act. I haven't seen them, and maybe you have them, and I haven't seen them. So I'd like to see them. And why are you not allowing everyone who wishes to speak during public comment the opportunity to do so? My understanding of the Open Meetings Act and the Attorney General is you have to require everyone to speak. I spent a lot of time in these meetings, and this meeting is going to be long. I sat through a lot of long meetings, but everybody got to speak. Let me turn to the town planner. The town planner has written 3 reports on this zoning application. One's dated April 11th, another is dated May 9th, and the third is dated August 2nd. In the first 2 reports, the town planner supported the site and landscape development plans and stated the steeple and the building heights were, quote, policy, end quote, issues for you to decide. The April 11th and May 9th, 2024 planning reports, when read together, find compliance with the landscape buffers and the lot coverage. As Tom said, he concluded in those reports that the traffic impact study does not require further additional deceleration lanes. Parking spaces are sufficient. The runoff for the proposed drainage is properly engineered. There is adequate water supply. There is compliance with the outdoor lighting requirements for parking, and there is compliance with the town's architectural lighting standards and others. I won't repeat them all. Regarding building height and steeple height, he states the town approved, this is the land planner, said the town approved the Creekwood Methodist Church steeple height at 154 feet and concluded that, quote, staff is supportive of the site and landscape development plans, end quote. Based on these reports and what Mr. Coppin has said tonight, I don't think there's any objective basis for you to deny this zoning request. However, if you've read the August 2nd, 2024 staff report, you know that he removes all references to the compliance with town regulations except the heights and the steeple in the building. Staff also removed any comments regarding support of the site and landscape development plans. I don't understand. Was staff directed to change this? The town was told we comply with the town's regulations.
Just to make it clear, the objective thing is that 154 feet is shorter than 173 feet. So even if Creekwood was approved, the church is still asking for more than has ever been approved in the town. And wall heights of 65 feet were never approved in any building.
Do you think that's the reason, Nemo, for them lowering the height by whatever it was, 16 feet or 17 feet?
I think they were trying to get close to that.
Yep. Comply with all your regulations. And in many cases, we went above and beyond.
Okay, so he's saying that the Creekwood Methodist bell tower was given conditional approval to be 154 feet, but it was never constructed. But I think he's arguing if that got conditional approval, then why is the temple, and we've dropped it to 158 feet, which maybe it's to get close to that height. Why won't you approve this?
That's what I was postulating.
Is that their argument for religious discrimination then, if you approve that, even though it didn't pass planning and zoning? Yeah. Why not the temple? What's your guys' thoughts on that?
Again, like even if Creekwood was approved, which we think the town planner may be wrong about that. We've looked through a lot of the documents. The mayor seems to agree that the town planner was wrong about that. And so the church is basing their argument off an error by the town planner in saying that it was approved because it wasn't legally. Even if it was approved. So there was no final sign off on it as approved. It was waiting to go back to other meetings, and then the ball got dropped and never got built. But people were positive and willing to have it. But I mean, there's other things to that. You know, it's on a bigger site. The building height next to it was shorter. It was just a single tower rising up. And ultimately, like I just said there, 154 feet is shorter than 173. It's just simple maths. There's about 20 feet in it, right? 19 feet and 8 inches or whatever. So that's the problem here, is that even if that was approved, the church is still asking for more, which is why I think their compromise was to try and get closer to that height, by coming back and saying we'll drop it by about 15 feet. That gets them closer to Creekwood, but they're still asking for more than Creekwood. So we've never seen what happens if they come in and ask for under 154 feet. If they did, that would be then interesting to see how they could use Creekwood as an argument. But until then, they can't use it as an argument because they're still asking for more than Creekwood got. And you can't say that they're discriminating, that they let Creekwood have something that they weren't allowed to have when they never let Creekwood have what they're asking for. If that makes sense.
I suppose it'd be a stronger argument if the bell tower was actually built and constructed as well.
Yeah.
And I guess a bell tower would be different to a building with people inhabiting as well.
Exactly. It's just a tower. It's not an inhabited structure. We actually believe this is one of the reasons it was moved from Prosper to Fairview, because of this supposed precedent. We did an entire episode with Nemo about the bell tower. It is a very complex issue, and we understand why residents feel, you know, a lot of them, their battle cry is the bell tower. But, you know, everybody look at Exhibit C. We won't go into all that here, but from what we can tell, obviously it went to town council. Town council said, yeah, we have no problem with it as long as planning and zoning, sent it to planning and zoning, where it never went farther. It was never signed off on. There's never any change, or there's nothing signed. But again, faithful members see that and they go, oh, and they will use that legally. So you'll hear about the bell tower a lot, but that's a whole different issue.
Was
the
bell tower ever constructed? Even like a small?
No, never built. They just
Never?
dropped it, and then they came back later, 15 years later, and they built something much smaller. It was never built. But of course, the church is claiming it was approved, therefore it should be a precedent. But we're saying it was really never even approved. And Nemo's saying, even if it was still much shorter than what they're trying to request now.
The United Methodist Church has a 38-foot roof height.
38.
And they did end up building a steeple, not a bell tower, which is 56 feet tall. So it's shorter than the current stake center that the LDS Church has. And this building's going to be, you know, twice that size. So,
and currently in the residential zone, the LDS, is it stake center or the chapel, is the largest, tallest building of 68 feet?
It's the tallest religious building that has a CUP. Like the town hall is 60 feet tall, but it's in the commercial district and it's only half as many square feet. So this would be the biggest building in town by far.
Okay, I'll hit play again.
What was required? Let's talk about meeting with church representatives. The church has been asked.
And I just wanted to point out really quickly, this is the lawyer in the initial meeting with the residents there that threatened them right away with Rluipa. The very first time the church ever interacted with the residents, this is a litigator doing his thing.
But that offer was declined by the mayor. He said in an email that we should meet after the P&Z meeting. So we had the P&Z meeting, and then we asked for a meeting. Fairview only offered to meet at 4 p.m. on June 4th, which was a few hours before the 7:30 council meeting that night, when we were going to consider this very issue. After some discussions, we negotiated and worked together to come up with 1 o'clock that afternoon. We also met with Dr. Hubbard and Mayor Lesnar and the town staff on July 11th, 2024. With other meetings with other council members were declined, even though we invited to meet even with their town council. We also asked the town attorney to meet with us in person. He declined. I'm not aware of anything in the Open Meetings Act that prohibits you from meeting with members, with us meeting with members of the town council or the town attorney to discuss our concerns and our applications in your city or your town. It's unfortunate that we've not been able to have more of those discussions. I assume that each of you did the same by not meeting with citizens who oppose the zoning's application. And I assume you did not discuss with each other how you're going to vote, because you know from your training in certain cases that can be a violation of the Open Meetings Act. At the first of the 2 meetings, we met with city staff, including Mayor Lesnar and Dr. Hubbard.
Him alluding to them not meeting, that's not true. They have sunshine laws. They can only meet with certain people under certain criteria. That is not true what he's saying.
That's correct. And they only asked for the meeting with the town council slightly a couple hours the day before the meeting. Just same thing happened here where they just sent the lawsuit in. All of these Rluipa laws.
Oh, I think we've lost sound.
I'm trying to remember if we lost sound on the night or not.
Oh, hold on.
Case.
I thought that was me traveling. Somebody else is having technical difficulties.
It must be the added video. Oh, sorry about that, guys. Let me see.
Remember, this is the issue in this case. In any case, we're here, and I want to talk to you about the law for just a moment. The reason I've emphasized the law is, remember, this is the issue the opponents put on their T-shirts. That's their first issue. Follow the law and not an inch more. They want you to follow the law. The church wants you to follow the law. Each of you took an oath to follow the law and the Constitution, and I'm confident that each of you want to and intend to follow the law. The law is very much in play in this zoning application. At the June 4th, 2024 town meeting, for example, the mayor said to the audience, and I won't get the quote right, but I hope I get the gist of it. You said, there is a serious legal issue in this zoning application or something to that effect. We all recognize it, but we're not addressing it. Why haven't you been willing to discuss the impact of the law in this zoning case? We stand ready to do that, to understand why what we think controls, you don't think controls. I don't understand why an applicant who seeks to build a church in your town, a landowner who seeks to build a building in your town, can't get a straight answer to this question. Why isn't Rluipa or the Texas Religious Freedom Restoration Act mandate that you approve the zoning request? I'm not demanding that it does. I'm just saying, tell me why it doesn't. I hope that you'll engage me, Mr. Custer, with more than shaking your head no. I respect your right to tell me no, but I hope you'll engage me. That seems fair. I also want to talk about your zoning ordinance. It's unevenly applied. The church believes it has been discriminated against by the town in its process and evaluation of the town's application of the zoning ordinance. For example, Fairview has a zoning classification that allows for sexually oriented businesses. That's Chapter 4.04 of your Code of Ordinances. But you don't have an existing specific classification for churches. Sexually oriented churches or businesses, such as adult theaters and adult cabarets, may be located in the Special Entertainment Zoning Overlay District. That's Section 14.02.751. So I'll repeat it for you, Dr. Hubbard. 14.02.751. And the town ordinance specifically states that the town intends to protect the First Amendment rights of sexually oriented businesses. You put that in your ordinance. And I agree with you. I don't like sexually oriented businesses, but the law requires them to have First Amendment rights, and you acknowledge them in your ordinance. But did you know that a sexually oriented business, such as an adult cabaret, does not need a conditional use permit for its business in Fairview? A church does. The town passed laws to recognize and legislatively protect the First Amendment rights of the owner of a sexually oriented business. Not so for the church. The church can't even get the council or its attorney to discuss the First Amendment and statutory rights and the town's position on those rights so we could possibly come to an agreement. But unlike sexually oriented businesses, drilling for oil, hamburger joints, residential homes, assuming they got zoning, they don't have to come to you and obtain approval because they've already got that approval. They got to comply with your rules, but they don't have to come down and do what we're doing, which is get a new zoning classification. By requiring the church to seek approval for the right to exist in Fairview when dozens of other businesses don't, that sure looks like discrimination, and it sure appears unlawful. Let's talk about the applicable regulations and the compliance by the church. In my opinion, the town's regulations applicable to the church are ambiguous, they focus on the wrong issues, and they ignore state and federal law. Let me explain why. The CUP states that the zoning classification may, quote, contain such requirements and safeguards as are necessary to protect adjacent property, adjoining property, excuse me, end quote. That's one of the things that you can consider under your ordinance. Section 14.02.517 of the town's Code of Ordinances identifies 10 factors the council, quote, may take into consideration, end quote, in granting or denying the church's CUP application. The church's application plainly satisfies the first 9 of those factors. But also that ordinance allows, in considering the church's application, you can take in consideration 2 other things. One is the aesthetic appearance of the use, and the other is the other sensory effects that the use may have on the established character of the neighborhood, its property, and the property within the town as a whole. I asked the question to myself, what do those standards mean and how are they applied? Do any of you know how they're done? Has someone interpreted those words in another document that I haven't seen? Because I haven't seen it. These factors are assessments, not facts. They're not criteria. And without criteria, how do you ground the assessment that something is not aesthetically acceptable? What is the factual basis in which sensory effects may have a negative effect on the, quote, established character of the neighborhood? Without criteria, you are given unbounded discretion, and that, in my opinion, is a legal problem. It ignores the right of your landowners and your citizens to understand the basis for your decisions. I mean, we're in Texas. Property rights of owners are essentially sacrosanct. This assessment in the cup doesn't even consider the rights of the landowner to develop its property.
I'll just jump in real
These
quick.
factors in the lack of...
Yeah.
Because he's saying, like, by what basis would you say that aesthetically it's not acceptable? Because those aren't codified, you know. So he's like, it just gives you essentially limitless bounds to say it is because we say so. But I think what the town can argue here, and probably will, is that the views of the people who live there are the thing by which they ground their decision. If the residents don't want to lose their sunsets, if they don't want it to be built bigger than what's currently already been built in the area, then that is up to the residents. If the residents make that sufficiently clear, then that, I would argue, would be their basis for saying that it's too tall. Because what Abernathy is arguing is, how can you say it's too tall when there's nothing to measure that by? There's no criteria. But I would argue that the residents make that criteria clear. And we didn't have it in this meeting, but what Israel Roberts reminds us is that when you consider the letters and emails that they receive from residents, they're overwhelmingly in opposition to the height and size of the temple. It's only when you look at the ones that they receive from out of town that they're overwhelmingly in support. So I think the town there has got a good factual basis to say, look, this is what our people are telling us, and that's why we've made this decision. That's just
right, because he's kind of arguing that there's no objective sort of criteria or standard, because the 35 feet height restriction in the residential zone, it doesn't apply to churches. To follow that zoning ordinance. Is he basically trying to argue that nothing in the ordinance prohibits a 158 feet temple, and he's basically saying that it's kind of loose, there could be an exception, and that it's basically them having to give almost like a subjective sort of determination based on like the aesthetics, based upon the suitability to the town. So it would be very handy if they did have a line in the ordinance that did say churches can't exceed, 60 or 70 feet. What do we think about that argument? Is there any weight to that?
The problem with that is it gives you no ability to adjust on situations. You can't anticipate every situation. This is why they have to apply for a CUP, and everyone has to be considered on its own merits. How do the neighbors feel? If the United Methodist Church got a 158-foot bell tower, but the neighbors all said, oh, we love this bell tower, we want it there, then why would the town say, well, no, you can't build it? They say, well, if the neighbors want it, the church wants it, go ahead and build it. But if the neighbors in this neighborhood say, we don't want this thing blocking our view, that should be taken into consideration. So these zoning laws are made, the reason you go for a conditional use permit is so that the council can put conditions on the permit. And they can decide, oh, we only want this high in this area, or we're only going to let this high. It needs to be on a site-specific thing. And his argument here about, the sexual-oriented businesses, I don't even know where he's going with that, because churches are allowed in all zoning codes. They don't have a special zoning code because they don't need one. They're allowed in every zoning code, whereas a sexually oriented business is only allowed in a specific zone, and it must comply with the zoning codes. They are not going to grant exceptions for taller stripper poles. They have to abide by the code, just as he said. So I didn't even understand his argument there, but you got to allow flexibility, and the people are the code. That's why you have a town council. The people come in and say, this is what we as a community expect, and if they don't like it, they say we're opposed to it, and that's what they've done here.
I think this then speaks to the profound lack of respect that the church has, if I'm being blunt, towards the opinions and views and concerns of the local residents, because they can't even get up there and say that might be a valid reason to deny it because the people don't like it. They're saying, oh, well, there's no justification for your decision, and the mayor is saying, well, no, the people are our justification. The people that I represent are my justification for making this decision. But the church doesn't see it that way because, like I mentioned earlier, these people are just opposition to God's will. And so why should you respect their views and opinions?
Yeah, and while there is that religious right to worship and build religious buildings, they also need to take into account and be understanding towards the rights of the residents of Fairview as well, especially them living in a smaller country town who would not like to have a massive building. And if they grant that to the church, then they would be put out as well. And I think he's trying to argue that they don't understand the federal law and that Rluipa, Rluipa, whatever it's called, and basically saying that, like, yeah, you don't fully understand it, and that the federal laws would pretty much provide this loophole or supersede their civic zoning laws and regulations, which I think is going to be interesting to see what would happen legally. But even if there is this legal loophole, just like ethically and morally, it doesn't look good, but also doesn't feel good. It just isn't good. Doesn't seem like what they're doing, even if there is a legal loophole.
Yeah, we'll get into
you
this
see
later,
it exactly
but, like,
right.
What the church can do
go ahead.
legally, what the church can do legally isn't always necessarily the right thing to do.
Right.
The church has a right to do this, but it doesn't mean they have to exercise that right. They could still compromise. But we'll talk about that later.
Okay.
Yeah, it doesn't make it right. That's true. And you're absolutely right. You've hit it on the head. They keep talking about Rluipa. What they don't understand is Rluipa also has protections for towns. And there are other protections that they do not have to egregiously exceed any of their codes or zoning. So it's meant to be fair to everyone so that it forces compromise. But from the church's perspective here, they're just like, you guys are ignorant of state and federal laws. Do your residents know that you're ignorant of state and federal laws? That is not true at all. There are protections everywhere for everyone.
And this is a town council. These aren't constitutional lawyers up here. Their job is just to say, does this meet our town codes or not? They're not there to interpret the Constitution. That's what the Supreme Court's for. And I think that's one of the reasons he keeps saying, we wanted to meet with you with our lawyers. Well, if you're a town councilman and you're going to go meet with land use lawyers, do you want to go in there by yourself and meet with these guys, or do you want to have some representation who also knows the laws with you? But you can't do that. If you do that, you have to meet as a council, and it has to be organized and maintained. You can meet with the common citizen and get their input. That's perfectly legal for them to meet with citizens on both sides. But you're not going to go in and meet with these guys' lawyers when you're a town councilman and you don't have any representation of yourself to give you the other side.
Right.
One of you might have said this earlier when I took a short break, but in watching this, I wonder how much of his presentation is specifically intended to try to persuade the council members, and how much of it is information to where the target audience is really the believing members.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I have to say, very different here than we've seen anywhere else. Area reps sent out letters telling people to go to stake centers and watch this. They had watch parties all over the areas so that there were people in stake centers watching these 5 hours of meetings. And Anthony, you're absolutely correct. These are points for the members to be able to understand when they're talking to residents about it. But
yeah, because why else bring up the sexually oriented business?
Exactly.
Yeah,
it's kind of a
just on a scandalous,
titillating flashpoint.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. I'm going to hit play.
The guardrails to apply them uniformly and consistently, in my opinion, violate the Rluipa and the Texas Religious Freedom Restoration Act and place a substantial burden on the church. Let's talk a minute about the application of the ordinance and then complaints by the citizens. Despite my concerns about your ordinance, if fairly applied, I believe that the proposed temple satisfies the CUP factors. The temple will be on what is referred to by some as Church Road. It will be surrounded by 3 other churches. The proposed use could not be any more consistent with the character of the neighborhood as voted on and approved by you or your predecessors. Yes, it's near residential neighborhoods, but from the beginning of this country and long before, churches have been built primarily in residential neighborhoods because that's where the people live. The Supreme Court of Texas long ago declared, quote, excluding churches from residential districts does not promote the health, the safety, the morals, or the general welfare of the community. To my knowledge, that is still good law and common sense. And the zoning ordinance states, in your zoning ordinance, it states that churches and temples can be located in any zoning district in Fairview, including neighborhoods. But some opponents, so let's move on to another complaint. Some opponents might say it's not consistent with the character of the neighborhood because it's just too big. Well, let's talk about that for a second. The not 1 inch slogan misunderstands the law. Under section 14.02.512 of the ordinance, the 35-foot height restriction in the RE1 district applies only to permitted uses, not conditional uses like churches. This council, or your predecessor council, didn't violate the town's ordinances when it approved the 154-foot bell tower for the Creekwood United Methodist Church, and nothing in the ordinance prohibits the similar height of the proposed temple. There's an example of it right around here, and it's shown up here. Less than 5 miles from this temple is another church building, which is very similar in size. It's the First McKinney Baptist Church. Yeah, it's not in Fairview, but it's in the same zip code, and it's about 5 miles away. I've driven by this church for years. I've attended the church. I've been in and out of the church, and I've never thought it was out of place in our community. It's located within single-family homes, and I've never heard anyone refer to it as some of the words that these folks have used about the proposed temple being a monastery, a monstrosity. Citizens need to have community services for their neighborhood, such as water and communications, and you provided them. You have placed water towers and radio towers right next to home. Citizens also need to have religious services. So take a moment. You can see what they are. I think you've seen them before. Citizens also have a great need for religious services in the neighborhood. In fact, during the COVID-19 pandemic, Governor Abbott declared that churches and religious services to be, quote, essential services to our communities like emergency services, water services, and grocery services. As you'll recall, essential services could never be affected by any regulation by a county or a city or someone else. This temple will have minimal impact on residential neighborhoods. We have done studies on this. The steeple will not be intrusive. It will peek out over the tops of the trees. We showed you photographs of that, and you'll see it clearly when you drive down Stacy Road. But we have a tradition in Texas of building churches, some with even tall steeples, like some of the steeples near your homes. We've shown a number of these throughout North Texas. Many examples exist of large churches, even the mega churches, which are built next to residential areas, have tall steeples. The temple is not a mega church, but like many other churches around, it's important that it has some height because the heights of its temples are meaningful, symbolic to the church members. Let's talk about the application of the law. The denial of the church's application would impose a substantial burden because the location and design of this temple was motivated by religious belief. I was surprised somewhat at the last hearing that after the mayor said he was going to hear from Fairview residents, one of the first people he called was someone who said he was from Britain. And that resident said that steeples are not required by the church doctrine, and therefore denying the application would not impose a substantial burden. If the opponent understood the law, he would have known that steeples not being required, even if that were true, is irrelevant. The Rluipa and Texas statute protect all religiously motivated conduct, not just conduct that's required or compelled by the church's doctrine. The Texas statute clearly says, according to the courts, that religious exercise need not be a, quote, central part or central requirement of the person's sincere religious belief. The Supreme Court has also said that town councils have no business deciding what practices are central to the church's belief. That court also said neither do courts have any business deciding what's central to their beliefs. I can tell you that the church is compelled by its beliefs to build temples. You've heard from them. And to build them, and they want to build them large enough to accommodate the religious worship that occurs inside the temple. This size of the temple was determined, in part, by the number of church members it'll serve. To deny the church's application would place a substantial burden on its religious exercise. I got to say, after all the information that the church has submitted to you regarding its belief in this temple, how this temple will serve its religious needs and allow it to express its religion in the area, are you really going to take the position that the members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints don't genuinely believe that the height of the steeple and the height of the temple building are motivated by religious beliefs? I know some of you a little bit. I have read your biographies. They're impressive. You are all serious and accomplished people, and you've had to make tough decisions in your past. I'm asking you to do your duty. If you don't know the law, find out what the law, and whatever it is, I hope that you will follow the law, which in my opinion would result in the approval of our application. And please don't let emotions and politics bind you from complying with your oath. We would like to reserve a few minutes at the back to address any questions that you may have. And thank you for your time tonight.
Okay, any responses to what he said in the last portion there?
Yeah, I have a quick one. I'm pretty sure what he said about me was that if I understood the law, I wouldn't have said what I said. But I wasn't speaking to the law. As far as I recall, I said that it wouldn't create a substantial burden to the religious worship of Latter-day Saints if the steeple height was shorter or if the steeple wasn't there at all. And that is entirely correct. As an expert on the church, which he is not, and in which all of us are, we can say height. Oh, we can say categorically that steeple height does not affect the worship of Latter-day Saints. One woman may get up and say that it did, but the members who were jumping up and down the fact that Paris Temple got built without a steeple and the fact that they finally had a temple in their country would disagree with her categorically. And I think they're more in agreement with the prophet, the person that we would kind of look to in this scenario for what a church member's meant to think about temples. If the prophet says something about the temple, that's kind of where we're all meant to go, right? So I didn't speak to the law. I spoke to Latter-day Saint worship. And I think that's an important distinction to make in my own defense there. And I wasn't wrong.
We actually have an episode coming out on Tuesday where we just talked to a lawyer about what this means and what substantial burden does mean under the law. And according to him, using Supreme Court precedents, is that the definition of a substantial burden on a religion is that it makes you significantly change the practice of your religion in order to do it. And I don't think anyone here can say that the ordinances or the worship in the temple is in any way changed by the height of the temple.
No.
I don't think anyone would agree but he pointed out that it is the church's responsibility now that this has been denied. They have to prove that it's a substantial burden on them and that this significantly changes their religious observance and their religious practices, which he thought was a pretty high hurdle for them to have to overcome.
Right, that's interesting. And playing like sort of devil's advocate for a moment, setting aside if it's ethical and moral, if legally the church were to win on this and be right, what if someone were to say that why not the town just grant the temple? Wouldn't that be in the interest of the town rather than to suffer a lawsuit if in fact Rluipa would allow a large temple? Any quick thoughts on that?
I was going to jump in and say that Rluipa not only protects the religious institutions, it also does everyone individual rights. So you can't even deny someone if you interfere with the right to worship in their own home. That also falls under Rluipa. So you can see the town, if they were to say, well, you get this, what about the guy who wants to build a garage and doesn't have the setback? And he says, well, it came to me and it was revealed to me in my religious worship that my garage must be there and I pray in that garage every day. What argument does the town have? Any religious zealot could come in and say anything they want and override any of the town's ordinances and codes if this interpretation were allowed to stand. And that's why they've got to stand up to this.
I also think to your point, Murph, about the whole should we just not let it happen just because they'll eventually win anyway and we'll lose a lot of money. I think there's 2 points there. There's the principle of the thing. These are proud people. These are people that feel like someone's trying to walk all over them, and so they want to stand up for their rights. They want to stand up for their right to control what happens within their own town. It may be offensive to say, but these people certainly look at the church as a multi-billion-dollar corporation as much as it is a church, right? They are flexing multi-billion-dollar muscles. There is a David and Goliath thing going on here. So there's that element of it, and I think the other element is they probably would have got that reaction again if they'd come in with something that was modest. If they'd come up with something that was slightly over the zoning, like 100 feet even a spire, and then maybe, coming up at the walls to maybe like 40 feet or so, then it would probably have got passed. And if they'd been open and transparent about it, and if they'd not threatened lawsuits straight away, and if they'd not sent out letters that said it's only a 2-story building when it's actually 65 feet at the roof and all this sort of stuff, right? If they'd acted a different way, people probably would have gone, well, it's not worth the fight, even if we are a bit disgruntled by it, because ultimately they'll probably win anyway.
Yeah, that just gets their backs up.
But yeah, and
bring up lawsuits.
Mess with Texas.
Anthony, Jim, anything you want to say?
I'm sorry, Anthony. I'm sorry. Never mind. Go ahead.
I don't have anything to add. I don't have anything to add. It just seems like I mentioned before, that my sense is that this is coming from the top with these narratives that this is from God. And my sense is that this attorney knew that, I mean, he was probably smart enough to know that he wasn't going to persuade the council to approve it. So what he was doing was, my sense, this is probably cynical, he was performing for the believing members who were watching and watch parties and who were there. And he was also setting things up to be able to refer to them in a future lawsuit. Again, that's probably cynical, but that's my sense.
Jim or Rebecca, anything to add?
Well, just very quickly, they can win this battle and they'll lose the war. The church has a history of doing this. The legal victory in they won the political victory in California when Proposition 8 passed, and that precipitated the legalization of gay marriage all throughout the United States. They lost the war because they had focused on the one battle. They can. I'm willing to bet the church has the resources to bully their way into this kind of a steeple, but this kind of approach from this lawyer is a great way to just destroy the church's reputation going forward. So we can get the steeple and we can lose the war.
Right.
It could even be a great way to see Rluipa reformed and tightened up in the future, because all it takes is for some sort of high-level court to look at this and go, hang on, this church is just using this as a battering ram here, and that's not what we intended by this law. So let's, tighten things up, which wouldn't be unreasonable to do. All you have to say is, for example, in order for you to claim it is a sincerely held belief of your religion, the leader of your religion has to have, made statements on it. It has to be contained within your religious text or something, right? There has to be some grounding for that claim. Right, they would just start to require some sort of grounding. So you can't just say, oh, well, God told me last night that I have to be able to have a 173-foot steeple, so now that goes. They're like, okay, no, we have to look at what you're grounding your claim about steeple height in. But the problem is that comes into First Amendment territory. So I don't know how well that would work. But yeah, I think they want to be careful, because Rluipa isn't beyond reform, I guess, is where I'd go with that. I couldn't say exactly how it will reform, because I'm neither American nor an expert in the First Amendment, but yeah.
Likewise.
No, you're right, Nemo. You're absolutely correct. And this is what we talked to Colby Reddish about. The church comes from an incredible position of power here, as we've seen in town after town. And a little background, how this steeple stuff even started in Cody, Wyoming. They tried the Rluipa thing. They said, you've got to let us build this steeple. It's part of our doctrine. Cody residents said, show us. We see 11 temples with domes. The church said, oh, yeah, we can't really show you. Next thing we know, a year later, they're asking their residents to make sure they mention how tall the steeple is important to all of their worship. Exactly what you said, Nemo, to use it. But I almost feel like the church may be pushing it here to run this up the flagpole, up the chain, and have some more definitive rulings on Rluipa. Right now, it's been this or that in the courts. It's gone both ways. Perhaps with a Supreme Court that skews a certain direction, the churches may be thinking, this is the time to do it. Let's push it all the way up and get a definitive ruling. That's a little frightening overall if we really think that through to its conclusion, but that could possibly be what's happening. So far, the Fairview Town Council, of all the recent churches, church towns where the church is building that this has happened in, is the only one that's been able to stand up and say no. In Cody, Wyoming, the Planning and Zoning Board had no choice. It voted it through, the Cody Temple. The residents had to sue their own town, saying there's so many irregularities. You did not vote correctly. You yourself said you were confused. You yourself said you were intimidated. Now the church has joined that lawsuit, and the same thing in Heber. So this is what happens. They're from an incredible position of power with all of their money and influence behind them. And these small towns can't stand up. We're watching Fairview try to do it, whatever that will mean.
Right. So before
maybe I mean, Rebecca alluded to this, but I mean, maybe they're playing a game of chess to a certain extent to set precedents for future, you know, so this isn't the end all concern in Fairview, Texas. This is about, this is what I'm suggesting, setting precedents for future expansion and future projects and things like that.
Are you saying the local members almost look a little bit like the pawns in this to a degree?
I mean, to a certain extent, yeah, because then it will model what might happen in the next dozen places.
Mm-hmm. Okay,
Maybe.
I want to move on. Before we go to the mayor's clip, I think, like, building off this, maybe we could touch on, like, what sort of, like, the main arguments were from some of the believing members that were there. And as I listened, there's probably, like, over 30. I kind of slotted them into, like, two categories. One category is to say that, you know, this temple is to serve, like, 16,000 people or whatever it is, surrounding areas. So we need a really large temple to be able to fill the capacity. So that's why it needs to be this big, even though the size of the spire, the steeple, doesn't really matter for, you know, serving the capacity of the people. But what is your thoughts on that, that they need a large temple and a 42-foot size building wouldn't do it?
I have some thoughts. The Paris, we keep talking about Paris, but Paris is 44,000 square feet. It's the same square footage, in fact, slightly larger than the square footage proposed for Fairview. And it's 42 feet tall. And it serves the 33,000 members in France. So to say that for the 16,000 members, of which we don't know how many are actually temple recommend holders, of which we don't know how many are actually going to be able to attend the temple, you know, that's a 16,000 catchment, I assume, of just members of the church, 8-year-olds through to 90-year-olds. I don't think that this is where I would love the church to be a bit more transparent about their statistics, and they could say, no, this is going to serve X many temple recommend holders, so we actually get an idea of how many people are actually coming through. But as far as I understand it, the 16,000 figure is just members of the church within the catchment area for it.
You're saying the Paris temple is smaller than even the 68 feet one in Fairview, and they have double likely the population.
Yeah, so it's a comparable square footage. It's only 42 feet tall, and it serves double the population that they're saying that the Fairview Texas Temple needs to serve.
Right.
And for those who,
sorry, Landon, go ahead.
For those who don't know where Fairview is about 20-30 minutes outside of Dallas. So it's in the Dallas-Fort Worth metro area. So it's a large area. There's already a temple in Dallas. They're constructing a temple right now in Fort Worth. So this is the third temple in the Dallas-Fort Worth metro area to serve the people. So just to put it into perspective there.
And the town council
were members complaining about, sorry, there were members complaining about how far they currently have to drive to get to their local temple, etc. Even though we've seen things saying that the Dallas-Fort Worth temple is by no means, or the Dallas temple, sorry, is by no means over capacity. But as a fellow islander, and particularly as someone from the island of Ireland, so even further out in the sticks, Murph, you will understand that complaining that you have to drive 30 minutes to your nearest temple is not really a serious complaint as a member.
Yeah, come on, I had to take a flipping boat. A boat and a bus half the time from Scotland. Yeah. We would take any temple in Ireland. We don't care if it's like 20 feet, no spire. Yeah. We just take anything. People are desperate.
Exactly.
This did become a main argument. We were trying to figure out what will the argument be aside from just God told us. And that was the argument at the Planning and Zoning Board, and also President Nelson told us that was the argument there, and also at the previous town council. So we're like, what are they gonna say now? And the danger of teenagers driving to do baptisms was a big one. It's too dangerous for them to drive from their area to Dallas, 7 minutes away on the freeway, and so that's why they need something that's closer. The danger of driving. That was an important one.
Ferry, that was fine.
Exactly. But the town council did try really hard to understand this information. Yeah. At one point, they asked a bishop, a man who stood up to speak as a bishop, and they said, how many are temple certified of that number that you're giving us? Of course, they don't know the correct words to use, but they're trying to find out how many people can actually enter the building. Because that's one of the first things these residents understand. They're like, wait, not everyone can go in? And then we have to kind of try to explain, no, it's a special group with the temple recommend. So the bishop said he did not know that number. So the town was trying to get that number. Another member of the Dallas temple presidency, the closest temple, stood up to speak. And the town council said, now, how big is that building? The temple presidency member did not know. So the town council is just trying really hard to understand the LDS point of view. How big are your current temples? How many people need to go? How many people can go? They're trying to get this information. For whatever reason, this information is not available to them from the church.
And Abernathy kind of came at the mayor like, why won't you talk to me about the law? Why won't you seek to understand the law with us? Why can't we talk about the law? No one's talking about that. So, well, actually, if we want to talk about people are talking about or not talking about, the residents of Fairview, by and large, will come up with statistics. They'll come up with points of policy. They'll come up with all these sorts of things. Members, as we see, if we're going to look at anyone speaking, get up and bear testimony. And then when they're asked to actually give some statistics or some figures or provide some actual tangible information, they can't very often. And that's not the fault of those members. It's because they've been briefed to do one thing and one thing only, which is to testify to the necessity of the temple being exactly this way. So what they've been told to do. They're not there to provide any information. So I think it's disingenuous of the town lawyer to complain that no one's sitting down and talking about the things that matter, and then the church encouraging all the members to get up and talk about things that also don't matter. Is whether they have to drive 20 minutes to their current temple or not doesn't really affect whether this temple will get built or not.
Yeah, and other than other people mentioning the federal law, the only other main sort of argument that I heard a lot of them share, and I appreciate it, a lot of them were very heartfelt and earnest and sincere, sharing their testimony, their love for the temple, the blessings of the temple, how it will bless them and the community, the beauty of the temple, how they find it inspiring, the height of the steeple. I think a couple of people even said it will reduce crime, which I don't know how much crime there is in Fairview, and all those things, it's like one, their statements of spiritual belief and faith, but whether or not you agree with it or not, all those things are great, but nobody's arguing against those things, and you could still have those same blessings or effects with a smaller size temple, with a smaller steeple. Why are those blessings of the temple only dependent on if it exceeds the 68 feet height?
If it is in the top 10% of temples by height in the world, right? That's what they need it to be. They need it to be in the top 10% of temples by height in the world in order to get the blessings that you've rightly said they could get from a 54-foot temple or a 42-foot temple or whatever size.
Yeah, it would still be beautiful and inspiring. And this is just me speculating here, but part of me wondered if there were so many of those remarks from members as well who were sort of bearing that sort of testimony, pleading for a temple to be built. Maybe they sense that the church isn't really going to drop and budge, and that the town council, unless they pretty much give in and concede that this will then delay, and they just really want a temple to be built. And I sort of wonder if that was part of it as well, really just sharing their love and desperation for the temple, so that the town would sort of have compassion and
the members need to direct that at the church, because the church are the ones blocking the construction of the temple. If the church would just shift and compromise and build a smaller temple, they could have it very quickly. If the temple is really this important to these members, which I believe it is to them, I absolutely believe that they're sincere when they talk about how important it is, then the people they need to be supplicating is the men in suits who are sat on the front row of this image.
Yeah, 100%. And I had a friend that posted on a faithful site about the McKinney Temple, just the question, don't you think, exactly like what Nemo just said, if we just simply express to the church how important it is that we have the temple, and all of us would be happy with concessions, with a different model, a different size, just so we could go there and experience the blessings. The post was removed several times from the site. That was not even anything that could be considered. Finally, my friend reworded it until it was able to be posted. And some of the comments there honestly were genuinely like that. Yes, that makes sense. I wish we could. There are times when members themselves have said to the church, this, please reconsider the Rluipa temple. I would point that out. The MTC in a neighborhood that was supposed to be 8 stories high. And members said, please think about this. Who they need to be talking to, I think, is turning around and talking to the church leaders, not the town council. But then, of course, on that same comment that finally got posted saying, can't we just work together with concessions? A lot of people just said, I wish we could, but we've been told it has to be this big. We've been told that it's God's original design and there's nothing we can do. Our hands are tied. So I don't know what you can do with that perspective.
Yeah, and it's not the town opposing, persecuting, discriminating against the church about having a temple. It's the size, it's the zoning, and that'll maybe set us up for watching the mayor's clip and what he has to say, and then we can give some comments after that. So the mayor's
Thank you, Richard.
Next.
All right, I have some remarks I'm going to read. And this is to educate folks on both sides of this issue. I have a little different opinion than some of the things you've heard. So first of all, I want to address the hundreds of Fairview residents who have studied and researched data related to the LDS history of temple building. First, I'm so proud of the hundreds of Fairview residents who have studied and researched data related to the LDS history of temple building. You've kept your focus on the issue at hand. This is a zoning issue, not an issue related to anything to do with the LDS Corporation. Thank you for your signs of strong support as the council works through this issue. I also want to thank those in our surrounding cities, as well as groups and individuals around the country and around the world, and current and former LDS members who have stated their support for the town of Fairview's position on this matter. The issue of revising our zoning ordinance for this proposed building is the biggest crisis that has ever impacted our town. I personally have heard from Fairview folks in every corner of our town, encouraging me and the council to resist this intrusion into the residential area of our town. I'll give you a copy of this if you need it, so you don't need a copy. Now, I want to address the thousands, potentially, I don't know how many people are outside, but I know there were thousands last time, of LDS folks who are here, somewhere in the vicinity of this meeting or listening online. First, welcome to Fairview. This is a great place. Keep hydrated tonight. It's very hot out there, so we're worried about you. We went to extraordinary measures tonight to try to ensure the safety of people and get as many people in this room and get as many, everybody, by the way, Richard will get a chance who's here to talk. A little bit about our town that you may or may not know, because many of the folks supporting the LDS position are not from Fairview. Matter of fact, the vast majority are not. The east side of our town was all residential with large lots on large homes on large lots. You hear about zoning RE1. What does that mean? That means residential estate, 1 acre. We have RE1, RE1.5, RE2, and then areas over further east are even less dense than that, 4 acre lots, 6 acre lots. The maximum home height in this area allowed is 35 feet, and we hold people to that. We have families with longhorns, alpacas, horse farms, and donkeys all over town. There is no sewer system or storm drainage system in that part of town. I'm talking about the east side of town, on the east side of Greenville out here. There are no businesses, there's no multifamily dwellings, and you've heard us talk about our dark skies. We take pride in that. As a matter of fact, just last weekend, the Star Party was held in our town. You can actually see the stars in our town. It's important to us. Zoning is tightly enforced, and all building is looked at closely to make sure that it will not have a negative effect on the neighbors. The objective is to maintain the country feel on that side of town that our residents moved to Fairview for. Now, that's the east side of town, the residential side where this temple was proposed to be built. On the west side, the side of town that you're sitting in right now, this is our commercial area where we have single and multifamily dwellings, shopping, restaurants, hotels. We actually have some corporate offices recently. There is nothing new about the way our town is zoned. It was done this way intentionally, and it's been this way for decades, maybe 70 years. So this is not something that we just came up with yesterday. This is the way the town was laid out, and it's why people move here, to keep the country feel on that side of town. So if you were here at the meeting, I have a request. I would ask you to walk about 50 yards about that way. Go north, and of the building we're in,
to the steps of Fairview Town Hall. And I've had some of your folks up there, which is in our commercial area. Look up at that town hall. It is 65 feet tall, coincidentally, same as what the temple is proposed to be, and contains 22,000 square feet of office space. The building that your leaders from Salt Lake City are proposing is 65 feet tall and about 45,000 square feet, surrounded by gleaming white marble and topped by a 109-foot spire. The proposed temple building itself is literally twice as large as our town hall. And then you stick the 109-foot spire on top. That takes it up to 174 feet, which is taller than our water towers. This proposed gigantic building is to be located in the residential side of town, the east side, where the maximum allowable height again is 35 feet. Every home over there conforms with this. You can actually get up on a drone and find homes that have flat roofs because of this limitation. We enforce it. At this location, this proposed building would be so out of scale, so out of place, that it would look like some alien civilization has dropped it onto that property. And I'm sorry if you don't like that, but that's what it looks like. This is the crux of our zoning problem. It is hard to imagine how an architect or a site planner or a simple casual observer could not see how out of place that building would be giving the RE1 zoning. Now again, for the LDS folks listening, this is kind of our side of what you heard a little bit ago. Your representative's position with our residents from the very start has been, if you don't like this, if you don't approve this building as is, we will sue you. If y'all remember the second information center, many of you people that are in this room were there. Your local LDS leaders, I'm talking to the LDS folks in the room, have taken the position if our residents don't like the proposed gigantic building, then move. An LDS family would be more than happy to pay a premium for your property to live so close to a temple. People who move to Fairview, they raise their families here, and they tend to stay. So we have very long-term residents in this community. We have new developments coming in, but when people get here, they tend to stay. This is why we are pushing so hard and why they are pushing so hard against this proposed building. Your attorneys from Salt Lake City are very smooth, calmly starting our conversation with the fact that they've dealt with municipalities many, many times, if y'all remember that conversation, and essentially have forced these communities to take an unwanted large building. What a thing to be proud of. Their message to us is fighting this gigantic building proposed for Fairview is really a waste of our time, and you heard that tonight. I think the word for this attitude is extreme arrogance, and it's what we in Fairview will remember about the LDS representatives. I would also add, shame on the local leaders for stabbing our town in the back. They knew exactly the impact this building would have on our town, and obviously don't give a flip, which is really disappointing. There's no secret what the town of Fairview would have done with this, or how we would have reacted. And if somebody didn't tell the folks from Salt Lake City, shame on y'all. Fairview has 8 religious buildings in our small town, one of which is the LDS Meeting House. The town and its residents have had no issues with any of them. In fact, the current LDS Meeting House is the tallest building at 68 feet in our residential zone. We have offered a CUP, conditional use permit, for the proposed building that includes a 42-foot maximum building height, which, by the way, is the height of the Chase Oaks Church, with a spire going up to 68 feet, with 42% impervious coverage of the property. The size of the Dallas Temple, which most of us have been to see multiple times, is close to what might work for Fairview in our residential zone. We have suggested that. We have also suggested that if for some reason this building must be built in Fairview, which we're not sure why, but for the LDS corporate folks in Salt Lake City to save face, this large building, as is, would probably fit into the commercial zone with few issues. That's on this side of town. So I asked the LDS folks listening tonight to join with the numerous LDS groups around the country that are protesting the use of LDS's organization, Great Wealth, to target smaller communities. This is happening all over the country right now, sometimes threatening to bankrupt the town. That has happened. to try to force zoning changes so they can erect gigantic buildings in residential zones. Most of those churches that are these pictures of are in commercial zones, by the way. They're not in residential neighborhoods. If the town of Fairview and its residents are somehow forced to accept this misplaced, gigantic building, thousands of folks from this area passing by that building every day will only see and remember the legacy of LDS arrogance. I suspect that is not the legacy that you want to leave with. So I ask one more time, please, if you're here from the LDS community, please walk about 50 yards up to our town hall, take a look at that building, double the size, and put a 109-foot spiral on top. That is what the issue is. The building is way too big, way out of place for that location. We've given options, what could be done. I think they're reasonable options. End of my speech. Thank you.
Okay. Thoughts on responses to that? I thought it was well said. I thought it was fair. He very much was focusing that this is a zoning issue. It's the scale and size of the temple being in a residential zone. And I get the impression from the mayor that he's trying to be fair. They want to try, that they want to have a temple in the town. They want to, help the LDS community to worship, but they also want to look after the members and citizens of their town and protect their rights as well, and to follow the codes and the regulations they have, but also to look after the interests of the people in the town, maintaining that country feel, not obscuring the views, keeping the dark night skies, those things. Whereas it seems to me that the church is very much focused on our religious rights to have a house of worship, and they're very much focused on themselves and not being maybe understanding or empathetic to how they're feeling. It kind of reminds me of this analogy. So I work in a school, and I was in nursery the last couple of weeks, which was really fun. And there was a couple of nursery kids outside, and one child was on this swing by a tree, and another child just like pushed them off. I was like, it's my swing, I'm on it. And then they were crying and they were fighting. So I had to go over sort out. I was like, right, who was on the swing first? They were, what did you do? I pushed them off. Was that the right thing to do? No. What could you have done? Ask them. Yeah, because you both want to go in the swing. And yeah, I understand you want to go on it as well, but maybe say, why don't I go on it for a bit? Then you go on for a bit instead of this. And it almost seems like the church isn't doing that compromise, but it seems like the town and the council, they're trying to find like a compromise here. You can still have your temple if it just adheres to our zones and regulations, that it can be, 68 feet. And that's basically what I have to say.
As a translation from that story, the church is acting a bit like a petulant child, or maybe someone that doesn't understand what sharing looks like, or compromise, etc.
Understanding.
And I think the problem is they have mixed up their religious right to have a building with their right to have it exactly how they want it to be, because they believe that God told them this is exactly how it should be. The problem is, how do you, and like Jim said earlier, we know as members with our common sense hats on that isn't the way that temples are really built. It's not the way they're really designed. There's an entire department dedicated to designing them and putting them together, etc. It's only under the Russell M. Nelson train of like Oprah Winfrey style, you get a temple, you get a temple, you get a temple, and then the temple department has to kind of run around and go, okay, how are we going to make this happen? The way it's done has been changed, and I think that leads to some of these issues as well. But common sense would tell you that this isn't the way to approach it. But they've intermingled this idea of, we have a prophet who claims to speak for God, which is a true LDS belief, and that then somehow has become, and he says exactly how temples should be, so we have to do it the way he said. And that's not an honest representation of what's going on in Salt Lake. I think Jim hit the nail on the head there. And I think we need to have that untangled, and that's the way compromise can happen. But the problem is no judge is going to come in and say that, because that's trampling all over the First Amendment. The church has a right to make up whatever it wants about its own religious institution and the way it operates. So this is why you have to rely on good faith of religious institutions to be honest about the way they actually operate, and not just play the God card, essentially. And it sounds harsh, but it's kind of what they're doing. They're throwing the direct will of the Lord into loads of processes that actually we understand are fairly bureaucratic and just done by people trying their best to put temples and houses of worship together.
And
that
if
make
the temple
sense?
was
Is that
revealed
unfair?
to President Nelson with those exact dimensions, then you could argue if it was reduced by 15 feet, certainly it could be reduced 50 or even 100.
Exactly. Once you've broken that and gone, okay, well, we can compromise in some way, well, then that throws that out as well. I mean, you only have to look to Doctrine and Covenants to see just how sort of much the Lord can insert himself into the sort of intricacies of things, you know, with how much certain people are allowed to buy stock in the Narvi Mansion house, etc. And you can only spend $50 and you can't spend more than that much money, etc. Right? So things can get like that in LDS scripture, but as far as we understand, that isn't the way it works. And to your point, the moment that they do compromise, they show that it isn't an uncompromising position. So at that point, why don't you just go the whole hog?
Right.
Yeah.
I thought it was a significant thing that the mayor expressed, that if they were applying for the building in the commercial zone, they'd probably get the CUP, right? And that he also said, we've been to the Dallas Temple multiple times to see it. It's 95 feet tall is the top height of the spire or steeple. And it's a 44,000 square foot building. And the mayor said, if you were asking for that instead, it'd probably get approved. Like he's not saying we're not going to let you do a temple. If you just built the Dallas sized temple, we'd probably approve it. I thought those two things were significant.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, definitely significant. And the fact that essentially, so what? After all this, the mayor is still saying, look, we'd be willing to break our code, like our zoning laws, up to 90 foot for you guys, if that's what you're asking for. Like, how much more compromising is he meant to be?
Right. Any thoughts or like summaries you want to give of what a lot of the statements were of the residents and what they were arguing?
The residents had a lot of facts and statistics and studies. You heard the mayor compliment them, how they had all gotten up to speed very quickly about who is the LDS Church and also about their own zoning laws, the codes, things like that. So they brought up things like traffic studies. Between the two meetings, they brought up things about lighting and its effect on migratory birds. They brought up the fact that there is no sewer system over there. They would have to then petition Allen, the town of Allen, to connect there. They brought up all the practical things that anybody would when they were trying to defend their zoning codes. And when the LDS people spoke, as we talked about before, it was heartfelt testimony. Several youth spoke in all the meetings. They would have their young people speak, and the council was very respectful of them. They complimented the youth on, you know, their testimony and their heartfeltness. So everybody was very polite back and forth. But as far as actual facts, the LDS people who spoke just said, dangerous drive to Dallas. We need it closer. And also, this is what our church requires. This is what God has said. Basically, in your scenario, Murph, God told that kid, that swing is yours. You can take it however you need. And that's the argument right there.
I just want to call out one member, and Rebecca, you'll be able to tell me who it was, because I can't quite remember, but I think they have a relation to McKinney. There was one member who got up and said, it's not threatening. The church isn't threatening by saying they'll stand up for themselves and uphold Rluipa. And then he went on to say, the church will sue and the loser will pay the costs.
Right. And we have the money to sue. Yeah. That was Rainey Rogers. Yeah. And he was the one that asked the mayor to write that letter to the Fairview Council telling them they should have the temple in their town.
Yeah, the mayor of McKinney wrote a letter to Fairview Town Council that was gushing about the LDS Church and what a wonderful blessing it would be to have the temple in town. And this is the same mayor that's just overseeing the denial of a mosque that wanted to be built in his town.
Ironically.
So, yeah, there's some irony there. Yeah. But anyway, Rainey Rogers got up, and I just want to call that out, because that wasn't good behavior to get up and basically threaten and say, we will win this lawsuit and you will have to pay the costs. Like, that's not productive or helpful. The church has hired people to make those bullying statements. The local members don't need to do it as well.
Right. And he's in leadership. Everyone who spoke was pretty much like, you know, stake president level, bishop level. Everybody was pretty high up. So, but again, it was civil. There were 70 people that spoke. If anybody wants to watch the meeting, it's very interesting. But you could see that the residents They had done their homework, and these are all real issues that any of us as property or home owners, if anything were being built next to our home, we would look into all of these different scenarios. And they brought up the point that this is not the first time they have opposed something in that area. I believe they said 5 other times, a medical building, an office building. They were showing that to indicate this is not religious persecution. We are trying to enforce our zoning codes. And so we have said no to an office building. We have said no to a medical building. There is some other things like that. So they're really multiple family housing. Yeah. So just the idea that it's bigotry or persecution, the residents were trying extremely hard to take that off the table. And most of them started with, we welcome a temple here. Please give us something we can all work with so that it can be built. We want you here. We welcome you here. Now, some of the LDS people, one woman got up at the beginning and she said, I love everyone here, regardless of how this goes. Although you could tell she sounded kind of heartbroken. You know, she couldn't believe that the pushback. She said, regardless, we will still volunteer in the community with you. We will still be here with you regardless, you know. And so that was nice. It was kind of an olive branch.
She felt torn between the love God.
She felt torn between it. Yes. And I feel that, you know, we feel for the members, absolutely, to be put in that position. It's kind of like how I felt during Prop 8 era. In my ward, I was in Utah, but they were telling us to get on buses, to sign up, to go down to California, to canvass. And I just felt for myself, I was very opposed to that. And sorry, there's a jet flying over my house. Oh my gosh. I was opposed to that, yet I was being asked by my religion to do it. It gives you this internal conflict. And I think that's why so many people reach out to Mormonish podcast and say, hey, I'm a faithful member. I can't say this out loud. I can't tell anyone, but here's my perspective, or here's a letter I got from my stake president that I'm very confused by, disturbed by. I feel inside that my moral compass is telling me something different. And it's horrible to feel that way. I wish those members didn't have to feel that way. There is compromise. I felt like the mayor, I felt there was almost anguish in his voice. Please give us something to work with here. We are trying to give you every possible thing we can. We can end this. You don't need to threaten us. You don't need to bankrupt us. You don't need what happened, which is to receive intent to sue the next morning after the city council meeting from 2 individuals, not the church. It doesn't have to happen, but it looks like it is happening.
Right. And the fact that with the vote, they voted without prejudice. They denied it without prejudice. Had they voted with prejudice, that meant the church could not come back for a year to present a plan. And that would seem to make sense after all the anguish everyone had, that the town is going to say, we don't want to go through this again. Let's do it with prejudice. But they didn't. They did it without prejudice, which means that the church can come back tomorrow and present a plan that meets the codes, and it can be the whole process goes over again. But they're saying, bring it. Just bring it with this. We gave you 2 months. You didn't bring it. Now it's voted, but bring it again. And we'll look at it again. Bring us something that works.
Folks, I'm going to have to, my wife has been very patient, but it's my turn to drive. So I'm going to swap out.
No problem.
This has been a great discussion. It's very nice to see all of you. And I think this has been a very thoughtful exploration of this. And I will look forward to hearing your final summations.
Thanks so much for joining, Jim.
Once Jim goes, we can get riotous, right? That's
right.
Holding us back from.
He's the only thing holding us in check.
Go nuts! Thanks very much.
I think it's really important that that we recognize just the efforts to which the mayor has gone, but also how clear he's been in the standards he set. He said at the end of the June 4th meeting that, okay, let's give them 2 months. If they don't come back with something that's within code, we'll just deny it then, right? And other people said the same thing. So I think it was very clear to the church, and that's why it was so confusing when the church came back with their significant concessions, which was knocking 8% off the height and offering to rename it. Didn't come anywhere close to meeting the codes of the city. So I refuse to believe that these aren't intelligent men that were sent away with that task of. I refuse to believe that the church lawyers and representatives didn't understand the very clear message from the town, which was this needs to come within our codes. And so they've chosen to ignore that, and they've chosen to offer these very slight concessions, I think, in prep for a legal battle to say, look, we tried to compromise. And I think it was always their intention to not budge and then to sue. I think why else would they not take those 2 months and actually do what the town asked? Unless those lawyers went back and were told by senior church leaders, no. And at that point, you can't blame the lawyers.
Right. No, and I think like some of the comments, you could see there is defensiveness, but I think that was rightly justified from some of the members of the town. They feel a little bit under threat from what the church is doing. And I think a lot of them are trying to be fair and understanding. We love the LDS people. We want you to have a building and the temple, a house of worship. We want you to also respect our zones, our laws, and also our feelings as well. And there was one man in particular, I don't remember who it was. I think his wife spoke before him, and he was like, whatever she said. And then he pretty much was like, look, we want you to have a temple. If you need a large temple, we should accommodate that. If you want to have a steeple, let them have a steeple. But then you also need to compromise and accommodate with the zones and the regulation, the zoning laws of our town. Let's try to find a solution and a compromise that doesn't go to court. They're not saying that we don't want to have a temple in the town. It's like, we want you to have a temple, but we also want it to adhere to our zoning codes. And that just seemed reasonable, you know?
The town has never said you can't have a steeple and you can't have a temple. They've never out and out denied either of those things. They've just said it can't be that big and it can't be that tall.
Yeah.
In terms of big, in terms of height of the roof, right? It can be that it can be 44,000 square feet. There are designs that can give them that space without breaking code. But yeah, they've never out and out denied anything like a steeple or the temple itself. They've just said it's got to be within the codes.
Right.
That's fair.
Any thoughts, Anthony, before I play the final clip?
Nope.
All right.
Just appreciate the discussion. You know,
we're getting
it's
near
really
the
good.
3 hours, so I'm going to get up. This is the last clip, and then we can kind of share our final thoughts. Oh, hold on. I'm going to share the screen.
This is tonight. We can approve this as it's presented. We can approve this project with conditions. We can deny this project without prejudice, which means that someone could bring in another plan, substantially revised plan, anytime they wish. They would need to go to P&Z and come through the council again, or we can deny with prejudice. And with prejudice means that they would need to wait at least a year to come before go through P&Z and the council again. So just so everybody knows, what are the 4 choices we have tonight for the council. So council, does anybody have any comments, thoughts, things you want to say? I just want to say one thing. I want to make sure that everybody in this room knows this is not about anything other than it's a zoning issue. The building is too big, and it's too big for that location. That is all this is about. This is not about where LDS is, where somebody else is. I greatly appreciate folks from LDS coming up, the sense of importance. I want you to know I get it. Okay, I really get it. But we also have, and I know about the laws, but we also have a need in our community to represent our community and to do what is best for our community and follow our laws. Ordinances are laws. That's like the Methodist Church you've heard about. It was never put into an ordinance, never. So it doesn't count. It's not a law. Now, I'm not an attorney, and that could go before a court someday, maybe, and I guess it will. But anyway, this is about a zoning issue, and I want to reemphasize for the LDS folks here, when you're done, please just, you have to drive around the corner to get there because we have the roads blocked, but go look at our town hall. It's that high, and it's twice that big with a big spire on top. It is a gigantic building in a residential area. I know people are questioning that. All around there is residential, and it's zone residential. So this is about that issue, nothing else. What else?
Nothing more American than him telling people to drive 50
well,
feet
at the
to
risk
the building.
Of sounding like a broken record, I want to thank everybody that got up and spoke, both the LDS folks and the Fairview citizens. I'm particularly impressed with the conviction that the LDS folks have for their faith. It was just totally impressive to me. I wish I had half the conviction that some of the folks that got up and spoke said. Having said that, it is a zoning issue. The Fairview residents who I represent and I have an obligation to listen to want the temple built, but they want it built in accordance with our ordinances. We gave you, 2 months ago, we gave you a template to go back and work from, 42 feet on the building and 68 feet on the steeple. I did not hear any movement towards that tonight. So I guess I don't know what to say other than we need to vote on this.
Okay, this is where they do the vote.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Are we ready to vote? Anyone else has something to say? All right, so all in favor of the motion as spoken, which is to deny without prejudice, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstain? So it is unanimous that we deny without prejudice. So thank you all very much for being here tonight.
Okay, so that's it. So can someone explain what denying without prejudice means for the listeners, and then we could just maybe share our final thoughts.
Landon covered that really nicely.
Yeah, denying without prejudice means they can modify the design and resubmit at any time. As I said, if they denied with prejudice, they could not bring it back for a year. They could not apply at all.
Which I'm surprised, like, you might think that they could have been justified in feeling some frustration or animosity in doing the with prejudice, but it shows they're still wanting to work with the church, and the church.
Very fair-handed of them. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was fair enough. So, like, I guess we'll just finish with like final thoughts on this whole thing, what the church is doing, the way they've handled it, and what you think might happen next and the likely outcome. Whoever wants to go first.
Well, I can say what I alluded to. What did happen is that the next morning, I mean, how many hours is that after the council on the next morning, they received a registered mail letter of an intent for legal action, again, from 2 residents of the town, not the church. So we will see what happens there. No. And whether or not the church will go through individuals, we've seen that happen before. So it doesn't look like the church is suing, an individual is suing, or sometimes the church will join a lawsuit. Like in the case of Heber Valley, they joined with the town to sue the residents back, to counteract a lawsuit. So there's definitely going to be some legal maneuvering, and we'll see. I honestly feel like this could be some kind of test case for Rluipa, just to see how far they can take it, how far up they can take it with a very conservative court. And perhaps like Rluipa locked things in 20 years ago, to lock it in even further for the going forward. But again, at what cost? On our podcast, we deal with residents from the other towns that are farther along in this process, Cody, Heber, and Lone Mountain. And just the fabric of those communities, and I'm not even exaggerating, is ripped to shreds. Neighbor cannot look at their neighbor in the same way. They're kind of looking at each other saying, we are so not on the same page. I don't even know who you are. And they really mean that. And that is the saddest thing at all, because all these communities were wonderful, vibrant, friendly, community-oriented places to live. And now, there's a lot of things going on behind the scenes on an individual level, on a micro level, for members and residents that just shouldn't be happening. Like you heard the mayor say, this is the biggest crisis we've ever faced. And there was another resident that got up and said, I've lived here for 20 years. This is the most disturbing crisis that's ever happened. So no one is taking this lightly. There are huge emotions. There are big things at stake on every side for every person. And I just hope and pray for compromise. It can all be solved with a compromise. Everyone can get what they want. Everybody.
Yeah, very good.
I can tell you what's not going to happen, and that's probably a mass conversion and baptisms in Fairview, Texas. But
true.
Yeah, it's sad. Obviously, the church can win this by simply dragging it out forever until the town of Fairview can't continue to fight and drains their funds. The church obviously can win this. They have the resources to win it. The question is, why would you do that? How does that benefit anyone by doing that to a town? It just doesn't make sense. And it doesn't get a temple to the people who they're saying that they need to get a temple to. So they're completely contradicting their very argument that they need to have a temple there. So if they want to have a temple there and they need to have a temple there, a compromise makes it a win-win, and everyone gets what they want.
Right. That's a really good point. Nemo or Anthony, final thoughts on what you think might happen next?
Yeah, I mean, my sense is that either this is about President Nelson expressing that this is a dictate from God, that this is the way it needed to be. It's either that, or it's going to take us another 1 to 3 years to figure out what this is actually about, because it doesn't seem rational that this is about Fairview or about having a temple there, because they could just do a smaller one, right? So that's my sense. Either it's going to take 1 to 3 years for us to figure out what this is actually about, or it's because Nelson said that God dictated it this way. I don't know how else to make sense of it.
Right. Nemo?
I like to sort of look at the choice that the church has before it, because they do still have a choice. You know, we talk about this like it's a foregone conclusion and we're basing that off previous behavior, but they have a choice. And I can't help but think of the scripture, they draw near to me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me, where you've got leaders saying size doesn't matter when it comes to a temple. You've got saying the architecture, the location doesn't matter. It's all about the ordinances, it's about the covenants. You've got leaders saying, oh, it's great when we have to follow local zoning, because that means that everyone loves and embraces and accepts the temple. That's them drawing close to this sort of spirit of Christianity with their lips. But their hearts, what they actually do when they have the legal backing to do so, is to bully their way into small towns and make what they want happen. Because the key is that in Paris, you can't bully the Parisian government into letting you have a temple. It's not going to happen. In Birmingham, it's the same thing. British planning laws lock down tight. So in Brussels, the church is having to put their temple in an office building, because that's clearly the only site they can get within Brussels to build a temple. So when they have to play nice, they will play nice. But when they don't, then we see where their heart is. I would think that saddens me deeply to be saying that about my own church. You know, I'm not averse to saying harsh things about my own church, as anyone who's spent 5 minutes on my channel will know, but it doesn't mean I necessarily enjoy it, right? It's sad to me that this is what I'm having to say about my religious community, is that this is the way they behave when they feel they have the law on their side. Because just because you have the law on your side, just because you have the right to force a temple into a community, doesn't mean you have to. They don't have to. They could compromise, and they're choosing not to. And that for me, that's the key takeaway. This is a choice by the church. If they sue, they're choosing not to compromise. They're choosing not to work with the community. They're choosing to put their needs over the needs of the people that this temple supposedly is meant to serve and beautify and all that sort of stuff. The blessing to this town that the temple's meant to be is somehow meant to materialize out of a background of animosity and lawsuit. And I don't understand how that works.
Yeah. No, well said. I guess anyone else have any final thoughts before I maybe share mine?
I was gonna say real quickly, when I grew up in the church in primary, I got that little green ring that said CTR, you know, choose the right. And I never thought by choose the right, they meant my First Amendment rights. They meant choose what's right. And I think there's a way you can choose what's right here and ignore, you know, what you think your rights are.
Yeah. No, well said. Like, I think the way I feel, like there's been lots of things I think over the past year between like the SEC fine or the Tim Ballard debacle or mixed signals about LGBT issues or the sex abuse cover-ups and now this, that there's lots of people who are concerned, who are active believing members. I have friends and family, and over this issue as well, it doesn't look good, but it also isn't good. It doesn't seem right or moral or being a good neighbor or Christ-like. And the church behaving this way, it's not helping people who have struggles. It doesn't look good. And while I am still a believer, and I'm probably the only one here who is, and you do feel that desire to want to defend the faith, and there's this us versus them. But then if this was another religion acting this way, I know I would feel the same way. It's not really about the religion, it's about the political and the ethical part of it as well, you know, and like you said, a solution and compromise could be had. I love that their temples are growing. There's more temples throughout the world. I grew up in a country where we didn't have a temple, and while I love the temple trips, it's a great thing that there's more access to temples throughout the world. And like we talked about, like, it's not about the design or the size, or if there's a steeple, even though steeples are nice, like, we're taught that, like, any dedicated consecrated building functions as the house of the Lord, and its primary importance is the ordinances and covenants. And the town, they're not opposing a temple being built or steeple, that they want to be accommodating, but it's like, you need to also follow the zoning requirements and our ordinances as well, and also to be understanding to the feelings of the residents as well. And whether or not the church can get an exception with Rluipa or a bit of wiggle room, even if, like Jim said earlier, if they can win the legal battle, which I think is really questionable if they would or not, if this did go to federal court, but even if they did, it seems like the moral and ethical war would be lost on it. And yeah, it doesn't look good, doesn't seem Christ-like. And I don't necessarily want to pick sides. I wish both parties could win, that the LDS community can have their temple, and that the Fairview community and residents, that it doesn't infringe upon their rights and their zoning laws. But if it did go to federal court, I think I would have to root for Texas. So that's my 2 cents.
And the people that can make everyone win are the people in Salt Lake City.
Yep.
Yeah. Guys, thanks so much for coming on. I think this has been great. I think this has been about 3 hours, so long, but I think it's been really fun. I've enjoyed all your comments and your insights, and especially a big thank you to Nemo, Landon, and Rebecca for all the great work you've been doing, bringing this all to light as well. And Anthony, thanks as well for coming on, and I'm grateful to Jim for coming on, for everything you've shared. Go check out their own channels as well, Nemo the Mormon, Mormonish. Anthony, your channel is Life After Deconstruction?
Life After Deconstruction.
I nearly said reconstruction there, but I was getting a bit hopeful.
Yeah.
That's something different.
And Jim Bennett's Insider. That's what it will be in a few years. That was a prophecy.
And thank you, Murph, for having us on.
Yes,
It really shows, you know, that we may be on different sides on different issues, but that we can come together and talk about these things. I think it's really important that
we're not that far apart.
Yeah, I think it's really important to have civil dialogue and to talk people on the other side. And there's many things that we still agree on, and if we agree on this, then that probably says something. But I'm all for people who have different views and opinions. Any listeners, if you have a different view or conclusion, put it in the comments. Don't forget to like this video, share as well, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on future content. And maybe we'll do more of these panel discussions in the future if some controversy happens. Hopefully it won't be for a few months, but you never know. And thanks again, guys, for coming on.
Thank you.
All right, take care. Bye-bye. Thanks everyone for watching this episode. If you've enjoyed it, please give it a like, share it with others who might benefit, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any future content. You can also listen to these episodes on podcast form on Anchor or Spotify, and you can follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. Check out my website for more content, personal blog, and more. And if you care to donate to support me, you can via my PayPal or Patreon, or through the website. And you can also give donations via YouTube through Super Chats. Thanks for watching Mormonism with the Murph. Take care. Bye-bye.